istuu siinä täällä kaupungissa, vaikka me ollaan erilaisia. Joten seuraavaksi kutsutaan haasteltavat lavalle kyselemään tästä aiheesta.
Eli hei, mä oon siis Erika Syrjälä.
Ja mä oon Enni Nieminen.
Ja mä nyt vaikka aloitan tällä ekalla kysymyksellä. Minkälainen tilanne tasa-arvolla on Helsingissä, koska rasismi ja homofobisuus näyttävät olevan yleisiä joidenkin nuorten keskuudessa, niin miten tällaista syrjintää voisi vähentää?
Joo, tämähän on hirveän iso kysymys ja niin kuin tässä hyvin kuvattiin, niin se, että Helsingissä jokainen riippumatta siitä, että minkälaisesta taustasta tulee tai millainen on, niin voi rakentaa oman näköistään hyvää elämää, niin se on aivan perusjuttu. Ja me ollaan esimerkiksi kaupunkistrategiaan, joka on tällainen linjapaperi, missä kerrotaan, että miten Helsingissä asioita halutaan tehdä, niin tosi vahvasti kirjattu, että tasa-arvo ja yhdenvertaisuus on keskeisiä arvoja, joiden puolesta me täällä töitä tehdään. Kun te kysyitte, että mikä on tilanne, niin tilanne on varmaan, ehkä voi sanoa, että se on sekä hyvä että ei niin hyvä. Ja se tulee tietenkin siitä, että kun Helsingissäkin ensi vuonna asuu, tänä vuonna, nyt mä oon jo vielä 25, tänä vuonna asuu todennäköisesti kevään jälkeen yli 700 000 helsinkiläistä, niin varmasti valtaosa meidän helsinkiläisistä nimenomaan saa elää sitä hyvää oman näköistään ja turvallista elämää, mutta totta kai on myös näitä tilanteita ja kehityskulkuja, missä nähdään rasistista käytöstä tai epäsopivaa käytöstä. Ei koske kun viittasitte nuoriin, niin se koskee yhtä lailla ja valitettavasti myöskin aikuisia. Ja viime kädessä se kysymys on siitä, että mä ajattelen itse niin, että itse asiassa yksinkertaisimmillaan kyse on siitä, että käyttäytyykö muita kohtaan hyvin ja kunnioittavasti. Jos näin toimitaan, niin silloinhan itse asiassa ei olisi rasismia ja ihmisiin suhtauduttaisiin tasa-arvoisesti. Mutta kyllä me tehdään myös tosi paljon aktiivisesti asioita. Meillähän on aina tämän tasa-arvo- ja yhdenvertaisuussuunnitelma, missä käydään lävitse sitä, että miten meidän palvelut toimii. Kouluissa esimerkiksi, tämä kuuluu ihan opetussuunnitelmaan, että näitä asioita käydään läpi ja opetellaan. Ja se on tosi tärkeää, että näitä asioita koko ajan myöskin tehdään, jotta tilanne menee parempaan eikä huonompaan päin.
Onko sinulla mitään konkreettista esimerkkiä antaa, että miten nämä tavoitteet näkyy jossain Helsingin päätöksenteossa ja tälleen?
No monipuolisesti, jos mietin kouluja, niin siellähän esimerkiksi osana kiusaamisen vastaista ohjelmaa kaikki koululuokat käy läpi pelisääntöjä, joissa käydään lävitse sitä myös, miten toisia pitää kunnioittaa ja miten yhdessä pitää toimia. Niin kuin sanoin, se näkyy opetuksessa, kun se tulee ihan opetussuunnitelmasta. Me käydään läpi esimerkiksi, ennen kuin olin pormestari, niin vastasin sosiaali- ja terveyspalveluista. Siellä esimerkiksi käytiin ihan viime keväänäkin keskustelua siitä, että miten vaikka ikäihmisillä, että kun on vaikkapa seksuaalivähemmistöön kuuluvia ikäihmisiä, niin miten varmistetaan, että he myöskin vanhoina päivinä vaikkapa ympärivuorokautisessa hoivassa ollessa niin kokee olonsa turvalliseksi ja että se pystyvät jatkamaan sitä oman näköisensä elämistä myös siellä ihan viimeisinä vuosina. Eli tämä niin kuin kattaa tosi laajan skaalan. Ja sitten on vielä oma kokonaisuutensa on se, että miten kun Helsinki on Suomen suurin työnantaja, meillä on 40 000 ihmistä töissä, niin meillä tietenkin joka päivä siellä työyhteisöissä myöskin tulee tilanteita, missä, no toivottavasti ei joka päivä tule tilanteita, mutta joka päivä tehdään töitä hirveän monissa tuhansissa työyhteisöissä, ja siellä voi olla tilanteita, jossa pitää puuttua siihen, että joku vaikka käyttäytyy epäasiallisesti, ja näin tietenkin myöskin tehdään.
No, miten aiotte vähentää kiusaamista ja syrjintää koulussa?
No näin, tämä kiusaaminen, siihen äsken viittasinkin, mehän ollaan, vaikka sanoin, että mä sanon näin, että kiusaamiseen, jos katsotaan viimeisiä muutaman vuosikymmentä muuta, jos mä mietin omaa kouluaikaa, siitäkin alkaa olla 15-20 vuotta, niin kyllä silloinkin siihen suhtauduttiin vakavasti ja mun mielestä tosi jämäkästi todettiin, että kiusaaminen ei kuulu kouluun ja musta se ääneen lausuttu ajatus ja periaate on ollut pidempään voimassa, mutta mä sanon, viime vuosina on vielä enemmän panostettu siihen, että oikeasti joka koulussa, joka luokassa tehdään kiusaamisen vastaista työtä. Meillä on sellainen ihan kiusaamisen vastainen ohjelma, missä on monta toimenpidettä tästä tämän yhden esimerkin kerroin, että joka koulussa, joka luokassa käydään yhteinen pelisääntökeskustelu ja sovitaan. Nämähän on tällaisia, että no, voi kysyä, että mitä järkeä nyt on jossain luokassa käydään jotain pelisääntökeskustelua, mutta itse asiassa on ihan todettu, että se, että pääsee käymään sen keskustelun, että nämä on meidän mielestä oikeita asioita, näin kuuluu toimia, näin ei kuulu toimia, niin vaikka oppilaat, opiskelijat sitoutuu siihen paljon vahvemmin. Ja sitten tietenkin on se, että sit pitää puuttua tiukasti, jos kiusaamista tapahtuu. Ja on aina hyvä muistaa, että se skaalahan on tosi laaja, että se on ihan sellaista arkista opettajan työtä, että sanotaan, että täällä nyt toimin noin, mutta sitten välillä voi olla kysymys ihan vaikka väkivallasta, ja silloin siihen pitää, voi mennä niin kuin aina poliisiasiaksi asti, ja niitäkin meillä, kun Helsingissäkin on tuhansia oppilaita, niin valitettavasti niitäkin tilanteita on, ja niihin sitten reagoidaan.
Kiitos. Onko kouluissa suunnitelmia parantaa sukupuolten ja seksuaalisuuden moninaisuuteen liittyvää opetusta?
Joo, tämähän on sellainen teema, mihin vähän jo viittasinkin, niin ihan opetussuunnitelman mukaan kaikissa kouluissa kuuluu käydä seksuaalisuuden ja sukupuolen moninaisuutta lävitse osana opetusta. Ja kyllä me Helsingissä sitä myöskin tehdään. Meillähän on myöskin opettajille tarjottu koulutusta siitä, että voi päivittää omaa osaamistaan ja ymmärrystään näistä teemoista. Ja tämä on kyllä niin kuin läsnä ihan jokaisen koulupolulla osana sitä opetusta ja hyvä niin.
Mikä on eri sukupuolien tasa-arvoisuuden tilanne Helsingissä, esimerkiksi palkan saannissa sekä koulutuksessa, ja miten edistäisit sitä?
Joo, tässäkin se on tosi monta näkökulmaa, mistä tästä voi katsoa. Viittasit tässä koulutukseen ja työelämän tasa-arvoon. Tämähän on vähän niin kuin se olisikin vaihtelee, että missä asioissa miehet on vähän paremmassa asemassa, missä naiset on vähän paremmassa asiassa. Jos mietitään näitä kahta, niin koulutuksen puolellahan on itse asiassa niin, että meillä on enemmän erityisesti nuoria miehiä koulutuksen ja työelämän ulkopuolella. Siellä on enemmän niitä, jotka on jäänyt peruskoulun varaan, enemmän niitä, jotka ei ole vaikka päässyt työelämään kiinni. No näitä asioita tehdään sillä, että vaikka vahvistaa opinto-ohjausta, varmistetaan, että jokainen oikeasti hakee lukion tai ammatilliseen koulutukseen tai valmistavaan koulutukseen. Nythän viime vuonna myöskin työllisyyspalvelut, joka siis tarkoittaa sitä, että ihmisiä, jos sulla ei ole töitä, niin sitten sua autetaan joko etsimään koulutusta tai tuetaan siinä työnhaussa, niin nehän on myös sellainen asia, mistä Helsinki on viime vuonna alkanut vastata ja siellä tätä työtä tehdään. No sitten siellä työelämäpuolella meillähän on tällainen erillinen työelämän tasa-arvo- ja yhdenvertaisuusohjelma, ja nyt sitä itse asiassa just valmistellaan, se päätetään tässä lähikuukausina, ja itse asiassa siihen liittyvää materiaalia, just tuosta kun Silja kun tiesi, että tämä on vähän täälläkin teemana, niin itse asiassa palkkatasa-arvo meillä on, voin sanoa, että kohtuullisen hyvällä tasolla. Et kun me katsotaan erilaisia ammattiryhmiä, niin joissain ammattiryhmissä keskimäärin miehillä on vähän parempi palkka, joissakin ammattiryhmissä naisilla on vähän parempi palkka. Se palkka, sit kun katsoo ihan koko kaupunkia, niin se palkkaero on niin kuin yhteiskunnassakin niin vähän miesten niin kuin eduksi, mutta taisi olla ihan, olisiko 2-3%, eli sillä tavalla ollaan niin kuin aika lähellä. Mutta sekin musta jo kertoo siitä, että kun meillä tehdään kun tätä käydään lävitse, niin meillä ihan katsotaan, että opettajat, näin, lääkäri, se käydään niin kuin työehtosopimusten mukaisesti, mutta että siellä on niin kuin 7-8 kokonaisuutta, joissa sitten katsotaan, että onko niin kuin naisten vai miesten eduksi niin sanotusti se keskimääräinen palkka. Ja tämä on sitten tietenkin, kun tehdään vaikka päätöksiä palkkauksesta, niin tosi tärkeää tietoa myöskin niille, jotka niitä palkkoja konkreettisesti päättää.
Yes. Kiitos haastattelijat. Nyt on taas sitten seuraavan aihealueen vuoro. Seuraavaksi käsitellään terveyttä, mikä on tietysti hyvän elämän ihan perusedellytys. Sairaana pitää päästä lepäämään, jos on naama vihreänä, ei kouluun, ei töihin. Mutta kuitenkin terveyskeskustelussa on tärkeää myös muistaa, että siihen terveyskeskusteluun liittyy myös sairausten ennaltaehkäisy ja ylipäätään vaan hyvien elintapojen opettaminen ja esimerkiksi rokotteiden ottaminen. Haastattelijat voivat nyt tulla lavalle.
Moi, mä oon Elsa Matson.
Ja mä oon Henni Palsala. Ihan ensimmäiseksi, kuka päättää, mitä maksuttomia terveyspalveluja Helsinki tarjoaa ja miten nämä palvelut rahoitetaan?
Jos aloittaa tästä jälkimmäisestä, niin Helsingissä, niin kuin kaikkialla muuallakin maassa, niin sosiaali- ja terveyspalvelut rahoitetaan valtiorahalla ja sitten niillä pienillä asiakasmaksuilla, mitä kerätään. Eli tämähän on tärkeä muistaa itse asiassa. Sitä ei moni nuori, mutta ei moni aikuinenkaan hahmota, että meillä on vähän niin kuin kaksi Helsinkiä. Että meillä on se Helsinki, missä järjestetään sote-palvelut ja se pyörii valtiorahalla ja sitten toinen Helsinki, mikä pyörii enemmän nimenomaan helsinkiläisiltä kerättävillä verotuloilla. No sitten se, että kuka päättää palveluista, niin itse asiassa tosi paljon niistä päätöksistä tehdään lainsäädännössä. Eli eduskunta säätää lakeja, joka määrittelee, että minkälaisia palveluita tarjotaan ja myös usein siitä, että saako niistä periä maksua, pitääkö niistä periä maksua, saako kaupunki itse valita, että minkä suurusta maksua se perii. Ja mä sanoisin, että mitä lainsäädännöstä tulee, niin se määrittää 90-95%, ehkä vähän jopa enemmän siitä, että miten ja mitä täällä tehdään. No sitten meillä on sosiaali- ja terveyslautakunta, tai sosiaali- ja terveys- ja pelastuslautakunta, ja sitten meillä on tietenkin kaupunginhallitus, valtuustokin omalta osaltaan voi sitten tavallaan tämän päälle tai näissä rajoissa päättää asioista. Ja sen puitteissa me ollaan esimerkiksi päätetty se, että terveyskeskuksessa käynnistä ei peritä maksua niin kuin itse asiassa joka puolella muualla maata. Ja siellä esimerkiksi saatetaan, nyt esimerkiksi tosi ajankohtainen keskustelu on ollut tämä huumeiden käytön ehkäisy, niin vaikka nyt syksyllä me ollaan päätetty, että laitetaan vähän lisää euroja ja vähän lisää työntekijöitä tekemään töitä huumeiden käyttäjien parissa, jotta voidaan siellä vähän vahvistaa kaupungin tekemistä. Eli tämän tyyppisiä tällaiset, niin kuin tällainen karsina meillä on tai tällaiset raja-aidat meillä on ja sitten sen sisällä niin kaupunki pystyy itse päättämään.
Joo, mainitsit tuossa nuo terveyskeskukset ja niistä tulikin tälleen seuraavaan kysymykseen hyvin aasinsilta. Ne on usein aika ahdistavia ja voi olla monille melko pelottaviakin paikkoja, niin millä keinoilla niistä saataisiin tehtyä mukavampia?
Joo, mäkin olen aika monta terveyskeskusta meillä kiertänyt, niin joo totta, joissain niissä on vähän tällainen niin kuin lääketieteellisen laitoksen niin kuin tunnelma, ei ehkä se niin kuin arkisin mahdollinen. No totta kai terveyskeskukset ei voi olla ihan kotiolohuoneen näköisiä henkisiä, kun siellä pitää tiettyjä vaatimuksia täyttää. Mä ajattelen niin, että on tärkeää, että meillä on vähän niin kuin erilaisia terveysasemia. Näinhän me myös nyt, kun tämä valtuustokausi alkoi, niin mehän linjattiin, että meillä esimerkiksi säilytetään tiettyjä pienempiä terveyskeskuksia myöskin, ja osa on sitten isompia tällaisia terveys- ja hyvinvointikeskuksia, missä on sitten vaikka laboratoriota ja enemmän erilaisia palveluita. Ja sehän on hyvä muistaa, että Helsingissä saa valita sen terveysaseman, jolla haluaa käydä, että jos sä oot vaikka asut Malminkartanossa, niin tavallaan niin kuin oletus automaattiterveysasema on se Malminkartanon terveysasema, mutta sä voit yhtä hyvin päättää, että sä haluat mieluummin käydä Kalasatamassa tai Munkkiniemessä. Ja se on ehkä myös sellainen asia, että kun meillä on erilaisia terveysasemia, niin mä luulen, että joillekin tuntuu paremmalta se, että on vaikka pienempi terveysasema, joku taas haluaa valita sellaisen, missä voi samalla kerralla käydä siellä laboratoriossa, jos tarvii, tai samalla tutulla asemalla hoitaa myöskin hammashoidon asiat. Ja tämä on ehkä se tapa, millä voidaan varmistaa se, että mahdollisimman moni kokee sen helpoksi mennä myöskin terveysasemalle käymään silloin, kun sitä tarvitsee.
Aivan. No tässä melko pitkäänkin on paljon puhuttu nuorten mielenterveyden haasteista, mutta siitä huolimatta esimerkiksi koulupsykologille on vaikeaa päästä, kun tarvitsee. Mitä tälle ongelmalle ollaan tehty Ja aiotaanko sille vastaisuudessakin tehdä jotakin?
Joo, mielenterveyspalvelut ja erityisesti nuorten mielenterveyspalvelut on ollut itse asiassa tosi paljon esillä ja myös meillä, että mä mietin vaikkapa, että kun mekin sosiaali- ja terveyspalvelut, me järjestetään kymmeniä, jopa satoja erilaisia palveluita, niin se mihin vaikkapa lautakunnassa, joka päättää näistä asioista, niin on nyt vaikka viimeisen 4-5 vuoden aikana, kun mäkin olin siellä niin keskitytty, niin tämä on ollut ihan niin kuin top 5 asioita, joka on ollut koko ajan esillä ja mä uskallan sanoa, että tilanne on myös sillä tavalla parantunut, että mehän ollaan avattu viimeisen 5 vuoden aikana tällaisia mieppejä, jotka on matalan kynnyksen mielenterveyspalvelut, johon ihan voi joko laittaa viestin tai kävellä sisään, niin siellä pääsee kohtuullisen nopeasti, nyt ehkä aina samana päivänä, mutta parin viikon sisään tapaamaan sitten terveydenhoitajaa tai pääsee vaikka 3 lyhytterapiaan tai tämän tyyppisiä asioita. No siinä on sellainen haaste, että mä tapasin nuorisoneuvostoa joku kerta tässä mennä vuosina ja kysyin, että kuinka moni tietää, mikä on mieppi. Niin taisi olla ehkä niin kuin puolet, joka tiesi, että sellainen on olemassa. Ja nuorisoneuvostossa on kuitenkin yleensä aika aktiivisia nuoria, eli huomaa, että se tieto ei ole niin vahvasti levinnyt. No sitten toinen on tämä koulupuolen asiat, ja siellähän meillä oli erityisesti korona-aikaan niin kouluterveydenhoitajien, koululääkäreiden myös, siihen vaikutti ehkä pandemia enemmän, mutta koulupsykologeissakin on ollut se tilanne, että siellä on ollut vajausta, mutta se on mennyt kyllä parempaan suuntaan. Meillä on aika lailla, jos viimeksi kun tarkistin ja muistan oikein, niin kouluterveydenhoitajien nämä niin kuin tehtävät on tavallaan käytännössä täynnä ja myös psykologeja ollaan palkattu lisää. Mehän ollaan vähän nostettukin psykologien palkkoja, että me ei olla mitenkään jäljessä vaikkapa uutta maata. Ja just vaikka tälle vuodelle, kun tehtiin uutta budjettia, niin me lisättiin niitä euroja, joilla sitten psykologeja ja kouluterveydenhoitajia, ennen kaikkea itse asiassa psykologeja ja kuraattoreita palkataan niin useammalla miljoonalla eurolla, eli menemättä nyt liian teknisiin asioihin, niin se kouluterveydenhoitoon, koulupsykologeihin käytettävä rahamäärä niin nousi nyt niin kuin reilusti 20 miljoonasta noin 25 miljoonaa, että se on aika iso satsaus ja se tehtiin nimenomaan sen takia, että me saadaan varmistettua, että psykologeja on sen verran kuin mitä vaaditaan, ja nyt kun meillä tietenkin myöskin kasvaa oppilaiden ja opiskelijoiden määrä, niin myöskin, että saadaan sillä tavalla palkattua lisäpsykologeja, että meillä on se määrä, minkä valtio vaatii niin kuin oppilaita per psykologi, niin toivottavasti se näkyy. Tämä on toki vähän tätä niin kuin tekniikkaa ja politiikkaa, vähän nämä mitoitusasiat, mutta se toivottavasti ainakin näkyy niin, että sinne olisi vähän helpompi päästä myöskin sinne psykologille, kun niitä on vähän enemmän ja enemmän riittävästi.
Joo. No saavatko sitten vieraskieliset lapset ja nuoret tarvitsemansa terveyspalvelut jollain ymmärtämällään kielellä?
No meillähän on siis, jos sä et osaa suomea tai ruotsia, niin sittenhän sulla on oikeus myöskin tämän tulkin käyttöön muuta. No, mä ajattelen itse niin, että kun terveydestä on kysymys, niin silloin tietenkin niitä pitää hyödyntää. No samaan aikaan meillähän on, kun me katsotaan, tässä on, aina pitää muistaa, että on niin vähän erilainen tilanne, että jos sä oot vaikka tullut maahan 10-vuotiaana, niin sitten totta kai todennäköisesti sä tarvit vielä 12-vuotiaanakin vaikka tulkkia siihen avuksi, että sä saat ne palvelut. Mutta sitten meillähän on paljon, kun puhutaan vieraskielistä muuta tai suomea tai ruotsia äidinkielenään puhuvista lapsista ja nuorista, niin itse asiassa valtaosa on syntynyt Suomessa ja käynyt Suomessa päiväkodissa ja kouluissa. Itse asiassa monissa tilanteissa lapset ja nuoret saattaa puhua parempaa suomea tai ruotsia kuin itse asiassa heidän vanhempansa. Ja silloin tietenkin heille ihan yhtä lailla samat palvelut ja samat palvelut suomeksi tai ruotsiksi niin toimii oikein hyvin.
Joo. No tietysti näiden terveyspalvelujen tarjoaminen on erityisen tärkeää, etenkin silloin, jos on sairaana. Mutta miten Helsinki sitten tukee nuorten ja lasten terveyttä ihan jokapäiväisessä arjessa?
No just näin, niin kuin sanoit, että silloin jos on oikeasti sairaana ja tarvii palveluita, niin ne pitää saada. Mutta itse asiassa tilannehan on sellainen, että valtaosa, että totta kai näitä ikäkausitarkastuksia ja tämän tyyppisiä, missä kaikki käy, mutta että valtaosa lapsista ja nuorista meillä voi itse asiassa aika hyvin ja se on positiivinen asia. No siihen vaikuttaa tietenkin se, että kysymys ei ole vain kouluista, palveluista, kysymys on siitä, että miten perheissä voidaan ja sieltä silloin iso merkitys. Sitten tässä aiemmin puhuttiin kouluruuasta ja siitä, että se oikeasti syötäisiin ja se olisi monipuolista ja ravitsevaa. Silloin itse asiassa tutkimustenkin mukaan aika iso merkitys, että miten syödään aamupalat ja syödään koululounaat ja ruuat. Harrastuksilla on iso merkitys. Mehän ollaan tehty tosi paljon, sitä kutsutaan tällaista harrastamista Suomen malliksi, mutta se idea on siis se, että jokaiselle lapselle ja nuorelle varmistettaisiin, että olisi ainakin yksi harrastus. Osallahan on niitä hemmetin paljon, mutta joillain ei ole yhtään ja se on hirveän tärkeää, että näin olisi. Ja nythän me vielä vähän niin kuin laitettiin vähän ekstra resursseja, euroja siihen, että erityisesti niille lapsille ja nuorille, jotka ei yhtään harrasta mitään, niin löytyisi harrastus. Ja mä ajattelen itse niin, että se voi olla itse asiassa aivan kriittinen se, että sulla on joku jos se kaveriporukka ei löydy koulusta tai sit voi olla, että vaikka kotona on hankalampaa tai muuta, niin itse asiassa harrastusporukka, urheilujengi tai partiolippukunta tai muu, niin voi olla itse asiassa aivan tosi tärkeä siinä, että elämässä menee kohtuullisesti ja pysyy mukana.
Kiitos. Tämähän johdattelee meidät aivan mainiosti seuraavaan aiheeseen, joka on vapaa-aika, mutta ensin kiitos haastattelijoille. Vapaa-aika on meille kaikille tosi tärkeää vauvasta vaariin. Ja se pitää myös olla mahdollista viettää miellyttävällä tavalla esim. Harrastamisen kautta. Täällä pääkaupunkiseudulla meillä nuorilla, etenkin peruskouluikäisillä, on tosi paljon mahdollisuuksia harrastaa ihan ilmaiseksi tosi laaja-alaisesti kaikenlaista. Esim. Judoa, kaninhoitoa, voi käydä kiipeilykerhossa tai mennä robotiikkatyöpajaan. Ja toki myös tämä meidän Nuorten ääni-toimitus, joka vetää tänään, on Helsingin kaupungin nuorisotoimintaa ja mun mielestä tosi arvokasta semmoista. Tämän lisäksi vapaa-aikaan aina välillä kuuluu tietysti juhlat ja niistä me aiotaan kysyä muutamia kiperiä kysymyksiä Danielilta. Mutta ensin mä haluaisin kysyä teiltä kaikilta, kuka täällä tykkää juhlia? Käsi ylös. No onpa tosi mahtavaa. Pitäkää kaikki kuulkaas juhlat taas pian, niin tulee hyvä mieli. Seuraavaksi sitten haastattelijat lavalle.
Terve, mä oon Venla Mäntylä.
Mä oon Leo Malmo.
Me ollaan huomattu, että eri puolilla Helsinkiä on eri tasoisia palveluita nuorille. Miten tämän oman alueen palveluihin ja harrastusmahdollisuuksiin pystyisi vaikuttamaan?
Joo, se on totta, että vähän eri kaupunginosissa on vähän erilaisia palveluita. Toki täytyy sanoa se, että kyllä meillä aika tarkkaan katsotaan sitä, että kaikkialla kaupungissa olisi palveluita, että vaikkapa että nuorisotaloja on tasaisesti eri puolilla ja kulttuurikeskuksia ja liikuntapaikkoja on rakennettu nyt tosi paljon lisää, vaikka ulkokuntosaleja. No, kun kysymys oli, miten voi vaikuttaa, niin on tällaisia suoria vaikuttamismahdollisuuksia. Kysellään esimerkiksi on tällainen oma stadi, jonka kautta voi vaikka vaikuttaa osallistavassa tai laittaa palautetta. No sitten nuorten osalta niin on tietenkin nuorisoneuvosto, jokainen apulaispormestari ja minä myös niin tapaan nuorisoneuvostoa säännöllisesti ja sitä kautta kyllä tulee tosi hyvin viesti perille niistä ajatuksista, mitä nuorilla on. Ja sitten aina, sehän ei katso ikää, että asiasta voi olla myös yhteydessä vaikka johonkin kaupunginvaltuutettuun tai johonkin lautakunnassa olevaan tyyppiin. Sitä varten poliitikot on tässä kaupungissa olemassa, että kuuntelee niitä ajatuksia eri puolilta kaupunkia ja vie niitä myös sitten eteenpäin.
Entä miten ala-asteelaiset voivat vaikuttaa Helsingin asioihin?
No ala-asteelaiset, tässä tulikin muutama niistä. Meillä on tämän oppilaskuntatoiminnan ja muun tämän tyyppisen kautta. Itse asiassa se menee aina sinne niin kuin ihan alkuluokkiin asti. Toki usein se näkökulma on siihen omaan kouluun keskittyvä ja vaikkapa siellä joidenkin niin kuin projektien tekeminen tai muu, mutta ala-asteelaisia koskee nämä edelliset asiat yhtä lailla. Et niin kuin sanoin, niin siinä ei ole ikärajaa, että minkä ikäisenä saa alkaa kirjoittamaan vaikkapa sähköpostia tai somekommenteissa on ikäraja, mutta se ei johdu kaupungista, vaan se johtuu näistä somepalveluista. Mutta että yhtä lailla ala-asteelaiset voi olla päättäjiin yhteydessä ja olla myöskin yhteydessä vaikkapa, jos se on kouluasia, niin siihen omaan koulurehtoriin ja nämä on tällaisia ikärajattomia juttuja.
Tästä Impin mainitsemasta juhlimisesta, niin miten nuorten turvallista juhlimista voitaisiin tukea?
Joo, tämä on hyvä kysymys. Usein parhaat juhlathan on sellaisia, että ne, ainakin mun mielestä, että ne syntyy vähän spontaanisti. Tai sitten ne on vähän niin kuin joku järjestää omille kavereilleen tai muuta juhlia. No, meillä on toki myöskin sen tyyppisiä asioita, vaikkapa nyt oli vaikka joka vuosi järjestetään tämä uuden vuoden konsertti, missä on ihan kaupungin järjestäjät juhlat, ja itse asiassa siellä on lasten ja nuorten juhlat ensin ja sitten vähän vanhempien myöhemmin, eli on näitä isoja järjestettyjä juttuja. Sitten kaupunki on mukana, vaikka ei varsinaisesti järjestämässä, niin tällaisia yleisiä juhlia, niin kuin vappu, kun jengi lähtee tuonne puistoihin juhlimaan, niin kaupunki itse asiassa tosi paljon satsaa siihen, että siellä siivotaan ja pidetään sitä niin kuin yllä. No sitten meillähän vaikka nuorisopalvelut tekee paljon sitä, että jos on vaikka koulujen päättäjäiset tai muut, niin että siellä ollaan paikalla ja jalkaudutaan, kutsutaan jalkautuvaksi nuorisotyöksi. Ja sitten tehdään myöskin itse asiassa yhteistyötä poliisin kanssa, että sehän on harmillista näissä kun nuoret lähtee vaikkapa koulujen päättäjäisiin juhlimaan, niin enemmistö käyttäytyy asiallisesti, mutta sitten välillä aina joku rupeaa tappelemaan tai jopa jonkun aseen, ei nyt ammusaseen, mutta et kuljettaa jotain linkkaria tai muuta mukana, niin sitten se poliisi myöskin puuttuu siihen. Just itse asiassa viikko sitten perjantaina oltiin poliisilaitoksessa koko pormestaristo ja kaupunginjohto ja käytiin just tätä lävitse, että miten meidän nuorisotyöntekijät voi tehdä poliisin kanssa yhteistyötä ja miten varmistetaan, että kaikilla on kaupungissa turvallista.
Onko se hyvä juttu, koska kaikki me lukiolaiset tiedetään, että kaivari tyhjennetään vuosi vuodelta varhemmin ja ensi vuonna sitä tyhjennetään varmaan joskus 10 jo, niin onko se hyvä juttu?
Se kaivarin mä itse asiassa vaikka poliisipäällikön kanssa puhunut siitä, ja poliisihan se päättää, että kaupunki ei tee tyhjentämispäätöksiä. Tämä on Suomessa sillä tavalla hauska, mä en tiedä onko se hauska jako, mutta mä oon ihan tyytyväinen siihen jakoon, että valtio hoitaa nämä pamppuhommat ja sitten kaupunki hoitaa nämä tällaiset hommat, missä autetaan ja viedään asioita eteenpäin. Itse asiassa aika monessa maassa niin kaupungilla on omat poliisivoimat, meillä ei sellaisia ole, mutta tosiaan kun tästä vaikka poliisipäällikön kanssa keskustelee, niin kyllä he sanoo, että hehän seuraa sitä tilannetta aika pitkään. Ja sitten kun ne katsoo, että alkaa olla vähän niin kuin tappeluita ja tämän tyyppistä, se on tällainen harmi tietenkin, että kun siellä 98% juhlii asiallisesti, itsekin on joskus nuorempana kaivarissa koulupäättäjäisiä juhlinut, mutta sitten mä ymmärrän kyllä poliisia, että jos siellä alkaa tavallaan tappeluita tulla ja muuta, niin siellähän niinku ehkäistään tosi monen rikoksen tapahtuminen sillä, että sitten tyhjennetään. Ja se, mikä on niinku kiinnostavaa siinä, on se, että oikeasti jengi myöskin lähtee sitten vähän niinku takaisin purkaut, että ihmiset ei jää pyörimään jonnekin niinku keskusta muille kulmille, vaan sitten siinä hetkenä osa lähtee, siellähän on paljon myös ei-helsinkiläisiä nuoria, niin sitten lähtee niinku kotipaikkakunnilleen ja jätän tämän asian poliisin käsiin. Niin sanotusti.
Entä onko Helsinki kiinnostunut siitä, millaisia nuorten palveluita muualla tarjotaan? Otetaanko vaikutteita esimerkiksi muista kunnista tai ulkomailta?
Totta kai on. Ja meillähän tosi paljon myös nuorten palveluiden osalta tehdään yhteistyötä esimerkiksi Espoo-Vantaan kanssa. Tämä on käytännössä kuitenkin, vaikka me ollaan eri kaupunkeja, niin tämä on yksi alue. Ja myös vaikka Keravalta nuoret liikkuu Helsingin keskustaan ja koko tuolta niin kuin Uudeltamaalta, vaan aina asti, eli tehdään tosi paljon yhteistyötä. Ja sitten totta kai katsotaan myöskin ulkomaille. Meillähän säännöllisesti vaikkapa lautakunta, joka päättää nuorten palveluista, niin käy jossain vierailulla myöskin ulkomailla. Ja hyvät ideat on aina tervetulleita ja huonot ideat ei ole tervetulleita.
Onko joku erityisen hyvä idea, jonka sä voisit antaa niin kuin esimerkiksi?
No ehkä jos yhden esimerkin nostaa, niin kun sanoin tämän harrastamisen Suomen malli, joka on vähän tällainen byrokraattinen otsikko, mutta se ajatus siitä, että jokaiselle lapselle ja nuorelle on joku harrastus, niin sehän on vähän inspiroitunut Islannista. Ei ihan samanlaisena, mutta sanotaanko inspiroitunut, että siihen harrastamiseen ja vaikka harrastamisen yhdistäminen, koulunkäynti ja muuta, niin se on sellainen asia, mikä on saanut ainakin inspiraatiota, jos ei nyt suoraan ole kopioitu, niin meidän niin kuin ystävyysmaista ja kaupungeista.
Miten Helsinki voisi tukea nuorten ja lasten oma-aloitteista kaupunkikulttuuria, esim. Joukkotapahtumien järjestämistä?
Joo, se on hyvä kysymys. Meillähän, niin kuin sanoin, niin nuorisotalojen verkosto ja muu nuorisopalvelun toiminta, niin kuin nuo äänitoimituskin, se nyt te enemmän keskitytte siihen toimituspuoleen, mutta vähän niin kuin vastaavanlaisilla tavoilla, niin myöskin on mahdollista tehdä erilaisia projekteja. Se aina vähän vaihtelee, että välillä on ollut joku tällainen pieni projekti, avustustyyppinen asia ja näin, mutta mä ajattelen näin, että yleensä jos on niinku aktiivisuutta ja innostusta, niin tapahtuu se sitten koulun kautta tai nuorisotalon kautta tai vaikka jonkun järjestön kautta, niin niitä paikkoja tehdä kyllä sit löytyy, jos on vain hyvä idea ja hyvä porukka sitä toteuttamaan.
Kaupunki lanseerasi viime vuonna tämmöisen digitaalisen jäsenkortin eli jässärin, niin onko digitaalinen jäsenkorttiversio pakollinen kaikilla nuorilla?
Ei ole pakollinen ja digitaalinen ei ole pakollinen, voi saada myöskin sellaisen perinteisen, mutta tosi moni, nyt mä pyydän anteeksi, jos mä valehtelen, mutta mä muistan nähneeni jonkun päivityksen meidän kaupungin somessa, että yli 40 000 olisi se jo ladannut. Et se on ollut itse asiassa aika suosittu se sähköinen jässäri, aika hyvä. Mäkin kun kävin Oodissa, niin samalla siinä Oodin Nutalla vierailulla, niin kyllä he sanoivat siellä, että oikeasti aika hyvin pystyy sen digitaalisen jässärin kautta myöskin lähettää tietoa ja viestejä siitä, mitä tapahtuu, mutta ei ole pakollinen tietenkään.
Vielä viimeiseksi, että onko sulla ideoita, miten nuoria saisi liikkumaan enemmän ulkona?
Joo, tämä liikkuminen, tästä harrastamista puhun jo paljon ja sehän on tosi niin kuin iso asia, että jos on se harrastus, niin usein se on nimenomaan liikuntaharrastus. Ja mä kyllä kannustaisin niin kuin käymään niissä liikuntapaikoissa, mitä kaikki kaupunki ylläpitää. Siis mä sanon, että ulkokuntosaleja on tullut tosi paljon, löytyy aika läheltä varmasti. Sitten tällaiset tekojääkentät on sitten Oulunkylässä tai Tehtaan puistossa, niin on ollut aika suosittuja. Urheilukentät on aika hyvässä kunnossa, että mahdollisuuksia on ja usein sit se on just se hankala, että sit pitäisi vähän niin kuin innostua, no se vaatii kaveriporukkaa ja näin, mutta sehän on kiinnostavaa, että Helsingissä lapset ja nuoret itse asiassa liikkuu enemmän kuin vaikkapa maaseudulla. Et kun on vähän tällaisia käsityksiä aina, että maaseudulla hiihdetään kouluun ja ollaan kauhean aktiivisia, mutta tämä on mennyt itse asiassa toisinpäin, että siellä kuljetaan autolla joka paikkaan ja meillä itse asiassa lapset ja nuoret vähän niin kuin siinä arjessakin liikkuu jo paljon enemmän ja muutenkin se on muistaakseni viimeisissä kouluterveystuloksissa oli mennyt vielä parempaan suuntaan, eli hyviä juttuja tapahtuu myös.
Yes. No niin, nytten on sitten luvattujen yleisökysymysten aika, eli ne, jotka oli alusta asti täällä, tietää. Yleisöstä siis pääsee kohta kysymään kysymyksiä, mutta ensin taputetaan toki haastattelijoille. Yes. Eli tosiaan rohkeasti saa kysyä ihan kaikkia. Mä oon varma, että Daniel vastaa tosi mielellään ihan mihin vaan kysymykseen. Joo, no otetaan hän täällä, vaikka oli käsi nopeasti pystyssä.
Moikka, mä oon Rebekka Schauman ja mä itse asiassa oon töissä Helsingin kaupungilla opiskeluterveydenhuollossa. Niin mä huomasin, kun puhuitte tuosta turvallisuudesta, niin mua kiinnostaisi vähän sitten se ehkäisevä päihdetyö, että millä tolalla se on tällä hetkellä ja mitä te olette tehnyt tällä hetkellä just nuoria ajatellen, että se ei tullut ollenkaan siinä. Ja mä ajattelen, että se on kuitenkin tosi tärkeä niin kuin osa sitä turvallisuutta, varsinkin näissä massakin tapahtumissa, että siitä kuulisin mielelläni.
Joo, kiitos. Ja itse asiassa aika ajankohtaisesta kysymyksestä. Se on ollut nyt tietenkin, kun tämä huumetilanne on ollut laajemminkin esillä, niin on paljon, ehkä julkisuudessakin ollut paljon esillä nämä asiat, mitä tehdään jalkautuvasta päihdetyössä ja muuta niin kuin nopeasti siihen asiaan, mutta se ehkäisevä päihdetyö on itse asiassa ollut meillä valmistelussa tosi paljon läsnä ja nyt menee vähän byrokraattisen puolelle, mutta sanon se kuitenkin, että mehän nyt kun me valmistellaan päihdestrategiaa, me ollaan ihan kaupunkistrategian linjattu, että tehdään erilainen päihdestrategia. Se oli ensin keskittymässä päihdepalveluihin, mutta me itse asiassa kaupungin johdossa nyt päätettiin syksyllä, että se on laveampi ja siellä käydään myöskin tämä ehkäisevä päihdetyö läpi ja niin kuin tavallaan linjataan sitä vähän perusteellisemmin, koska sehän on tosi laaja kenttä, että se on sekä sitä tavallaan kouluissa tehtävää arkista työtä. No nyt on tullut aika hyvä palaute, en tiedä, varmaan mielipiteet vaihtelee tästä, kun koko muistaakseni 7-luokka käy siellä poliisoittokunnan konsertissa, missä on Finlandia-talolle kootaan koko ikäluokka ja sitten siellä on sekä tällaisia vähän niin kuin kevyempää ohjelmaa, että sitten väliin aina niin kuin tietoiskuja, jotka osa käsittelee toki myöskin jotain somekiusaamista tällaista, mutta myöskin tätä päihdeasiaa ja tavallaan, että aika laajalla paletilla sitä tehdään. No näissä isoissa tapahtumissa, niin se on aika hyvä, mä en tiedä, onko se ehkäisevää vai onko se reaktiivista päihdetyötä, mutta sehän on iso merkitys, että siellä on sekä meidän jalkautuvaa nuorisotyötä, että sitten vaikka järjestöjä, Walkersia ja tämän tyyppistä. Se oli kevätpuolella, mäkin kävin vaikka Walkers-bussissa, joka toki järjestötä tekee, mutta aika tiiviissä yhteistyössä. Kaupungin kanssa se oli silloin vaikka Malmilla, kun siellä oli tilanne, että siellä niinku nuoret olivat kovin aktiivisia, sanotaan näin, niin sitten sinne tehtiin vähän niin kuin sellainen kohdennettu läsnäolo iltaisin. Eli kyllä näitä asioita tapahtuu, mutta mä oon tyytyväinen siitä, että me nyt siihen päihdestrategiaan otettiin myös tämä ehkäisevän päihdetyön näkökulma, niin se varmasti vielä vähän jäntevöittää sitä, mitä kaikkea sen osalta tehdään.
Jes, olisiko lisää kysymyksiä yleisöstä? Myös te lapset ja nuoret yleisössä voitte rohkeasti kysyä. Mutta kyllä aikuistenkin kysymykset kuullaan.
Päällä, joo. Yes. Kiitos. Moi, mä oon Saara Lehtinen, 2 päiväkotilaisen äiti, sen lisäksi myös koululaisen, mutta itse asiassa puolisoni on miettinyt tällaista, kun hän näitä meidän pienempiä vie sinne päiväkotiin ja hakee sieltä, niin nämä varhaiskasvatuksen työntekijät niin, ei välttämättä ole varustautuneet niin hyvin tähän ulkotyöskentelyyn kuin mitä ehkä toivoisi, tai sitten on ilmeisesti ollut sellaista keskustelua siitä, että olisi hyvä, jos kaupunki tarjoaisi kunnon varustuksen, kun sitten kuitenkin niiden pienten lasten kanssa ollaan siellä ulkona tuntikaupalla, niin onko tähän jotain linjausta tai tulossa jotain uutta?
Joo, tämä on ollut itse asiassa keskustelussa, jos ei nyt ihan joka vuosi, niin tämä tasaisesti nousee ja tästä on valtuustoaloitteitakin ja muuta. Ja mekin itse asiassa silloin, kun Pakaisen Pia oli kokonaisuutta vasta apulaispormestari, niin vaikka puolueena sitä ajattelin näin, se itse asiassa jakaa mielipiteitä. Sitten sitä on kyselty niin kuin henkilöstöltä ja henkilöstöjärjestöiltä ja sitä keskustelua on käynyt, että osa on sitä mieltä, että olisi tosi hyvä, että saadaan varusteet, ulkovaatteet esimerkiksi kaupungin puolelta ja osa on niin kuin ehdottomasti sitä vastaan, ettei haluta niin sanotusti jotain uniformua kaupungilta, vaan halutaan hankkia sellaiset varusteet, jotka on niin kuin sopii itselle, koska sehän on totuus, että sittenhän ne olisi varmasti sellaiset, että olisi tietyt standardoidut kengät ja tietyt takit ja muuta. Ja sen takia siihen ei ole päädytty, että viesti on usein ollut, sit se vahvempi viesti on usein ollut se, että se mitä vaikkapa euroja siihen satsattaisiin, niin on parempi satsata vaikkapa varhaiskasvatuksen työntekijöiden palkkojen kehitykseen. Ja mehän ollaan tehtykin, kun meillä on kaupungissa sellainen, on näitä yleisiä korotuksia ja sitten on palkkakehitysohjelmaa, niin itse asiassa jos katsoo viimeistä vaikka 5-6 vuotta, niin ne varhaiskasvatuksen puolelle on satsattu vähän tällaisia niin kuin ylimääräisiä palkkapanostuksia, jolloin on saatu sitä jonkun verran korotettua. Eli asia on ollut esillä, sitä on niin kuin keskusteltu. Se viesti on sitten kuitenkin kallistunut siihen, vaikka mielipiteet myös henkilöstön puolella jakautuu, mutta kallistunut siihen, että koetaan, että on parempi, että niin sanotusti ne eurot, mitä on, että ne menee niin kuin palkkapuolelle ja sitten ihminen voi itse hankkia ne varusteet, eli siis ulkovaatteet, joita haluaa käyttää.
Jes, oliko tässä edessä kysymys?
Kiitos paljon. Mä olen Minja Koskela ja mulla on ollut mahdollisuus kysyä Danielilta kaikenlaisia kysymyksiä kaupunginhallituksessa.
Joka viikko se kysyy jotain.
Ja valtuustossa. Mutta mä en ole onnistunut vielä kysymään niin hyvää kysymystä kuin tämä mun seuralainen Else täällä esitti. Else on 5-vuotias, mun lapseni. Ja hän halusi kysyä, että miten Herttoniemeen saadaan lisää pulkkamäkiä?
Tämä on tosi hyvä kysymys. Tähän samaan teemaan. Ensimmäinen asia on se, että meidän täytyy toivoa, että on hyviä talvia, että tulee lunta. Et meillä on kaupungissa yksi vähän niin kuin virallinen pulkkamäki. Mä en tiedä, onko Helsinki ainoa kaupunki, missä on virallinen pulkkamäki, mutta Paloheinänmäki on virallinen pulkkamäki. Et sinne sitten, jos missään muualla ei oikein ole lunta, niin sinne yritetään saada lunta. Eli meidän täytyy toivoa, että tulee tosi paljon lunta. Ja sitten mä sain itse asiassa vähän samanlaisen samaan liittyvän palautteen mun kummipojalta muutama viikko sitten. Hänen äitinsä välitti sen kuvan kerran, että tuli kova vaatimus, että näitä lumia ei saa siivota pois. Eli pitää jättää lumikasoja eri paikkoihin, ja ne lumikasat voi toimia ehkä myös pulkkamäkinä sen lisäksi, että niihin kaivautuu. Ja itse asiassa, koska Helsinki vastaa erityisesti lasten toiveisiin, niin mehän ollaan itse asiassa päätetty, että me vähemmän lunta viedään pois rekka-autoilla esimerkiksi mereen tai sulatettavaksi ja jätetään enemmän sitä myöskin kadunvarsille, joten tähän pulkkamäki- ja lumikasa-toiveeseen, niin tähänkin kaupunki kyllä vastaa. Hyvä. Peukkuu tuli.
Jes, siellä takana heiluu käsi.
Moi, ja mun kysymys olisi se, että ensimmäinen kysymys, saako kysyä matematiikasta?
Saa kysyä matematiikasta.
No okei, tää on helppo kysymys. Mikä on maailmankaikkeuden suurin numero tai luku, mihin ei käytetä kirjaimia sen kirjoittamiseen? Ja toinen, jos olisi maailmankaikkeusalueena, niin mihin tilaan se mahtuisi siellä? Ja mä tiedän tähän vastauksen.
No niin. Hyvä. Mä oon ollut ihan hyvä matikas kyllä koulussa, mutta maailmankaikkeuden suurin luku, johon ei käytetä kirjaimia sen kirjoittamiseen.
Ei kun numeroita.
Numero, anteeksi, just näin. Numero, no niin, eli se on se pitäisi lähteä jollain, se on 10 potenssia, silloin se pitää olla joku vaan parempi on se, että se on joku triljoona potenssiin, triljoona tai jotain tämän tyyppistä. Sen jälkeen varmaan pitää mennä jo kirjaimien puolelle. Mutta tämä on mun paras veikkaus, mutta potenssilaskua siinä pitää käyttää. Ja sitten mihin tilaan maailmankaikkeus mahtuisi, niin nyt sun pitää kyllä auttaa mua, koska...
Ei kun se, että jos se kirjoitettaisiin paperille, niin että mihin tilaan maailmankaikkeudessa se kirjoitettu se luku mahtuisi.
Niin, että jos se niin aivan paperille, niin okei. No, nyt ajan säästämiseksi, niin mä keskeytän mun pohdinnan ja sun pitää kertoa nyt mulle vastaus.
No okei, ekan kysymykseen vastaus olisi ollut Grahamin luku ja tokaan, että ei mahu maailmankaikkeuteen.
No niin, hyvä. Kiitos. Mulla on sellainen periaate, että joka päivä pitäisi oppia jotain uutta, niin ainakin tämä on nyt täytetty tämä asia 2 mennessä.
Jes, nyt alkaa meidän aika hiljalleen loppumaan, eli jos ei ole mitään super kriittistä, niin tämä oli nyt sitten tässä. Loppuaplodit ehdotan Danielille.
Kiitos paljon, erityisesti hyvistä kysymyksistä. Kiitos haastattelijalle. Mä voin tulla sinne.
can change our world was translated into Finnish last year. So in Finnish it's called kuluerä, mikä on hoivan arvo. And I don't know if you know this, but in Finland it has been on several of media's like top lists of books to read right now. So it was very popular, and maybe you can see it also from the amount of the crowd. But then, beside Emma here, we also have Anni Marttinen. And Anni, you are an eco-social economist who is currently working at TEHY, the Union for Professionals in Health and the Social Care Sector. And your book, Hattaratalous, which translates into cotton candy economics, is actually dealing with a lot of the same themes as you do, Emma, in Deficit or in Kuluerä. And this one was published in 2024. And last but not least, here on stage, we have Olga Palo. And Olga, you are a feminist activist and author, and you also published a book this year. It's an essay novel, which is called Keskusteluja lapseni ja Virginia Woolfin kanssa, which translates into Discussions with My Child and Virginia Woolf. So, I have to say once again, firstly, that I am really super happy and honored to be sharing this stage with all of you, and especially for this discussion, because you've all dealt with this theme of both care and value, and many different aspects of it in your literary works. So we now have 1.5 hours to discuss this pretty vast topic of value of care. And I was thinking that our discussion would go a bit along the lines of your book Deficit, so it mixes larger philosophical questions with the world of economic measurements. And in the end, we will have time for some questions or reflections as well from the audience. But let's start up with this warm-up round, and you can all give your short own definition of what care is and what it actually means to you. And let's start with Emma.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for having me, and thank you everybody for coming out. It's really wonderful to see you all, and thank you so much for everyone who's read Kuluerä already. It's very overwhelming to see it happen. So I think for me, in my book, I define care extremely broadly. So I write that it's all the work and activities, paid and unpaid, that it takes to keep people healthy, happy, and alive. So I don't define care by what type of an act it is. I define it by the demand for it. So if there is a demand for something, there is someone who has to do it. So for example, if a person is unhappy, oftentimes they will need someone to talk to them. So that creates a need for care. If someone breaks their leg, that creates a need for care. If someone is a child and cannot eat themselves, that creates a need for someone to hold the spoon, etc., etc. So I think for me, I very much think of what does it take to keep a person functioning, to make us able to be a friend, to be a partner, to be a parent, to be a citizen, to participate in democracy. And if we are able to do that, I think Freud said a person needs to function, they need to be able to work, sleep, and love. And I think about that a lot, that if a person can do all those things, then they're getting the care that they need. But I think many of us are finding ourselves unable to do one or all three. And that means that we are in a care crisis, obviously.
Very well said, and a very, very broad and good definition. I would like to just add that I also think about care when I think about ecological aspects, when I think about nature and other species. I think that care is in the core of all of our society, and not just society per se, but also economy, because we need to think about, as you said, that we need to think about the well-being of our workers and people. We need to think about the care in the core of our economy as well.
Thank you both, and thank you all for being here. I think for me, what drove me to write the book was this kind of conflict I felt between what I maybe had viewed as care and then what was my personal experience. To be honest, like 10 years ago, when I was kind of trying to become an artist, I wasn't super interested in care, didn't value it very much, and maybe that's a topic we get to talk about later. But maybe I had this idea that care is something, and also I feel like 10-ish plus minus years, some years ago, there was a lot of like care in the arts. It was a topic that was like very prominent at some point, but it seemed to me that the care was always, it was like cuddly and soft and pink, and it was bunnies and it was puppies and it was babies who do not cry, and yeah, it was softness and it was always like easy. But then after having my first child, my experience of care was more of like darkness and depression and like giving birth as this near-death traumatizing experience. And it was an experience of kind of loneliness, some kind of very profound feeling of unfairness and those kind of things. So there was this huge friction of what I felt that care should be, and then how I felt it in my life and in my body at the time. So then I kind of turned to a lot of feminist studies, also like feminist art. I was reading a lot about mothers who commit suicides and infanticides and that kind of stuff. So then I think like the feminist care studies helped me, and I have a quote here that's already from the 90s, but Bernice Fisher and John Tronto wrote that care is, and I think this sums up what you both just said, it's a species activity that includes everything we do to maintain, continue and repair our world so that we can live in it as well as possible. That world includes our bodies, ourselves and our environment, all of which we seek to interview in a complex life-sustaining web. So kind of then I started thinking of care more as a like thoroughly political question than something I feel or So to me, kind of the dark side of care has always been interesting, because also like scholar Christine Kelly writes that care and violence cannot be separated. Whereas beforehand, I had maybe this idea that they're like opposites to each other. So in short, like the complexity of care, and then thinking about it in very political terms. Yeah.
I love that there are some children in there going absolutely nuts. It's very perfect for the theme.
It really is. Like, this is a tram museum, actually, that we are in today, and the tram museum is open. So we have the voice world or the sound world of the tram museum as well around us. But I think it fits quite well into the discussion that we're having. So the next questions, I'm going to address them to one of you, but please, like all of you, feel free to also give your input or comment, or if you have like something you want to reflect on to the theme or to the question as well. But Olga, you actually provided me with a really good bridge towards the first or this question, since you already like took up the theme of care, of course, also being political. And so I wanted to start after the warm-up round. Now the proper discussion maybe with a theme that all feminists are really interested in, and if they aren't, they should be. So with power. In Deficit, you describe how economics has become the most politically influential science, while also being treated as a natural science instead of a social science with internal conflicts and different schools of thought. So Emma, if I've understood correctly from all of the podcasts that I have listened to with you, you have a background as a cultural historian, and that's kind of also the viewpoint you come from when you in the book. So as a cultural historian, can you tell us how we have come to this like position of power for economics, and how has it shaped our time or the time that we live in?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think there has always been, and the book starts at the Enlightenment time, and I think some people who read Kuluera will be like, why can't you just get to the current time? Why do I have to read about Thomas Hobbes in the 1600s? But there is a point to it, which is that what happened in the Enlightenment was that there came this ambition of running society almost like a factory, of having this perfect mechanical society that ran systematically, rationally, logically, where there was no religion, superstition, tradition, but where we used logic and science to rule society. And of course, there were really good ideas in this, right? It was good that we exchanged a lot of religious superstition with scientific results. But it also led sometimes, and I think that's what has happened in our time, to the idea that you can kind of get rid of politics and instead ask a scientist or an economist, how should we rule society and what is valuable and what is not valuable? And I think this especially became important after the fall of the Berlin Wall in '89, where there was this idea that we'd had this ideological fight between communism and capitalism won, right? We fell on the wall and the communist countries fell. And then many politicians, and I think many very powerful people in business, also started influencing the academy and the study of economics more and more, and saying, okay, communism is out. And the idea that you can plan the economy, the idea that the state should be involved in the economy is out, and now we need to have a market-focused, not only market-focused states, but also market-focused economics. And what they were really, really good at, as you said, was to talk about the market as if it was a part of nature. That it had these rules, like the rule of gravity, it followed these perfect patterns. And when politicians get involved in the economy, they destroy this beautiful natural system. The only thing that was an issue here, of course, was that the market is not alone. The market takes value out of the natural world. For example, it uses timber, it uses steel, but it also takes power out of our value out of us, right? It takes our time and energy and bodies and our children and use them. But in economics, they created this idea of the market as something that creates value only, not something that can also take value. And I think there is this kind of old saying, it's a little bit cliche, but I think it kind of works, which is that the greatest trick that the devil ever played was to convince people that he didn't exist. And I think this goes a little bit for how economics has been sold to the general population, which is that economics is not political at all. It is like chemistry or physics. That is what we are told as regular citizens, right? And that is a fantastic, unbelievable cultural power to get to speak as if you were not a political actor. So what happens with a lot of economics is that it has some very, very political views of the world, of nature, of work, of time, of women, of value, but they are completely hidden in numbers, in complex formulations, and it makes it very difficult for us to criticize it. And just to show an anecdote here at the end to like show, for example, when my book came out in Denmark and also in many other places, many people were like, how can you write this book when you're not an economist? But no one said, how can you write this book when you're not a mother, when you're not a nurse, when you're not a teacher, which is also things I describe very, very in a lot of detail. And it just shows who do we respect, right? Whose world do we think is difficult to understand? And what do they think, oh, every idiot can write about being a mother, right? That's simple. But writing about price theory, that's only for geniuses. And it's a tremendous power, right? And I think that was something that I really wanted to challenge and say we must kind of, and I think that's what you've been doing, especially Annie, with a lot of your work, like democratize the conversation around economics, because they've kind of holed themselves in and made sure that no one asks any questions. And no one dares ask any questions because they're afraid of being told they're stupid and they don't understand. And I think that is kind of the journey that everyone desired that we could get rid of politics and have science instead. But what really happened was that it was politics, but it was cloaked and hidden away as if it was science. And that's something that is maybe the most impactful thing, in my opinion, that has happened in politics since the end of the 80s in the entire world, in my opinion.
Well, fortunately for us, we have a genius or an economist in our midst.
I wouldn't say a genius, but
I would say that.
On stage, do you want to reflect something on this, what Emma just said?
Yeah, yes, Emma's description was very well fitted into the world as it was and as it is. And just to add that we had political economy or economics before. Like 100 years ago, what we now call economics, which is now very mathematized, very much quantified, we had political economy and economics, sorry. And it was easier to discuss about politics, about vision the world that we wanted to have, and now it's mainly just about deficit, excuse me, debt, work. Even though we have what you mentioned, we have people underneath, we have nature underneath. And yes, after the Second World War, economics became very much mathematized, very much quantified. We had GDP in the 1930s, which became the indicators that sort of ruled the political discussion, and we became very growth addicted, and that's another story that we can come into later. But from a personal perspective, what I see is that when I started studying economics and when I started my first job as an economist, what I heard was that we were working in a very high-level institution, and we were watching these economists talking about in a morning show about economics. And there was this one worker, a colleague of mine, saying that I would never be able to talk about economics that simply because it's so embarrassing. So there's kind of this eliteness, even a status kind of idea between economists that you cannot talk about it in a simple way. You cannot democratize it because there's this status and eliteness to it. So yeah, that's kind of the story that I had in mind.
Let's linger, Anni, with you for a bit more. Because everyone who follows you on Instagram or has read your book or other very many published texts, you know that you are a feminist economist, and you think that the economics and the economy exists to serve humanity and not the other way around. So can you give us a short introduction to what feminist economics actually is and how it differs from this established branch of economics today?
Yeah, for sure. I wanted to mention also that when I started sort of democratizing or popularizing in feminist economics, I had people telling me that you're too young to have this kind of status of feminist economics, and that's too embarrassing even for you, so you shouldn't call yourself a feminist economist. So yeah, that's also something that we have in the society when it comes to economists. But basically, what you, Emma, already described very well, that we have this sort of mainstream economics in Finland, but also more broadly in the whole world, and it's called neoclassical economics. And we have assumptions that can be described even toxic, very masculine. The description of humanity that we have under these assumptions that we use in models that model the society that we have, they are, like I mentioned, very, very dehumanizing. So we have this homo economics or homo economist who is very rational, enjoys competitiveness, wants to maximize profit. And that's the idea that we have of human when we talk about the mainstream economics. And that's also the economists that we have from the degree. And then there are other economists who are interested in the value of care and ecological aspects. And we already talked about this behind the stage, that it's very difficult to get into these doctrines and these schools. And we have to sort of look for the other schools ourselves. So we talk about heterodox economics, which is not the neoclassical economics. And heterodox economics include ecological economics, feminist economics, etc. And feminist economics per se looks at the gender questions, looks at the gender pay gap, looks at care, and studies these issues. And I must say that looks at the humanity in a much better way than neoclassical economics does.
Do you have anything you want to add, either of you, to this power and economics part? If not, then yeah, go on, Emma. No, go on.
Okay, I think, Annie, you said it perfectly. I think something that's also very interesting about that was kind of shocking to me that when I really started studying neoclassical economics intently is that it sees every human being as isolated from one another. So every individual acts on their own accord. But if you look at something like having a child, for example, or buying a Christmas present, or buying dinner, or buying an apartment, or getting a salary, it is often something we do also reflecting on other people. Our partners, our children, our family, like we will often think also of the interests of others. And when we are children, if we are sick, we will be intensely in relationships with others who teach us to speak or who help us. For example, I'm chronically ill and describe that in the book as well. You know, I wouldn't be sitting here with you today if it wasn't for the people helping me maintain my body, getting the medicine I need. Those people are completely unavoidable if I am to make money, go into the market and shop and work and all these things. And I think that was something that really struck me about neoclassical economics, is that these relationships between people, the way that people create each other, interact with each other, depend on each other for survival, is just completely absent. Like, it is nowhere. And I think something that you've been talking about as well, Olga, is that that's something that I, as a cultural historian, is very interested in, because it is really the ideal of our society, right? This complete dependence, independence from others. And I thought about this a lot when I became chronically ill. I was 27 years old, and I was put into hospital for 5 days, and I was very, very, very sick. And I felt a lot of shame about it. I thought, oh no, I'm a burden to my family, I'm a burden to my society, I can't work, I can't make any money, I have to borrow money from my parents, it's embarrassing, and I'm weak. I thought I'm weak. And I think that I became very interested in this idealized figure of the completely independent individual. This idea that we have that it is possible to be completely independent. And when I started looking into neoclassical economics, I was like, oh, it comes from here. The idea that there is such a thing as a person who doesn't need any help from anybody. And I think it is such a toxic thing in our culture, because it is based on a lie, right? And it is based on making invisible all the people that help us become who we are, and who we help become who they are. And it gives such a completely skewed and distorted view of how society actually works. And I think for some people, when they become a parent, that's when they see it. For me, it was when I become sick. That's when I looked at all these nurses and thought, you are keeping me alive? I'm nobody without you. And it was a little bit of an existential crisis, because I had been taught, you know, I'm a strong woman, I can take care of myself. And then lying in that hospital bed, you realize that's grotesque, right? And I think that's something that became clear, that cultural figure of the independent human being, neoclassical economics has played a big role in making that the main character of how we structure our society and our relationships and our work and homes and families.
I think actually, I also found that this theme of the idealization of independence today was one of the most interesting themes of deficit. But Olga, you also deal with these questions in your book when you're writing about these conversations with your child and Virginia Woolf. And in the beginning of the book, you actually describe how the white philosopher man as a figure was a role model for you as a younger self, a bit like Emma just also said. So what do you think it is in the late modernity? Like, why do we as humans and humanity today glorify independence, and why do we fear the dependence again on each other?
Yeah, thank you. Not sure if I can talk for humanity though, but I can try to trace my own thinking. Yeah, actually I'm going, as Emma does, I'm going back to enlightenment. Maybe I will talk a bit more about the arts, but I think it's interesting that the whole concept of bellas artes, like the fine arts, was put together in the 18th century. And it was kind of this concept, or it was a box under which was filed these hobbies of rich white dudes. So it's kind of random what we consider as art. It was like these dudes were doing these things, so this is now art. Of course, I'm oversimplifying a tiny bit. But so I feel that the whole kind of figure of an artist and what art is in the Western world, I mean, is very much tied to this kind of rational individual subject of enlightenment. And I'm not sure if it untangles that easily today either. So yeah, so for me, when I was growing up, and I grew up with a lot of artists, and so I saw kind of this rational, independent, separate, universal, but also individual subject as kind of this crown of humanity. And I feel that it's still very prominent in the arts when you regard as an author person doing his art. There's this kind of requirement for him to being able to be objective, and he has enough distance to whatever subject he deals with. And it's not to say that he doesn't have emotions, like he has the other maybe foot in kind of psyche and emotions and that kind of stuff, but they don't control his art. He can always kind of maintain his distance. So I feel that the figure of what like the artist with a capital A is coming from the same stream that you describe in your book. And in that I feel that the essence is kind of this distance from other people, distance from the world. And also it's the same figure that you write in your book about the dad who gets to choose the piece of bread that he wants, like who is this normal person that everyone strives to be and wants to be. And also I feel like when I was growing up in the 90s or like in the early 2000s, the popular feminism very well adopted this idea as well. It was like kind of just breaking the glass ceilings and getting a nanny from the Philippines to kind of be able to then do your own thing and become yourself. Or like the Sex and the City feminism, like these white women who work in PR and hate babies. So that's kind of, I think that was like my where I come from. So then when I was at the same time kind of trying to become a mother and an artist, I felt like there was this, again, huge friction between those, because the other one, for me, the ideal was to become an artist, I need to become, and overall, like to be this interesting white philosopher subject who I admired so much because they have this distance and they're interesting and they can talk about anything because they're so well read and they can always travel to, I don't know, Spain or London or Paris or anywhere to write. And so there was this figure, and then at the same time I was going through something that showed how deeply entangled everything is. And it wasn't this, for me it wasn't just like easy and pretty, like the caring part of it, but it was just like, if I'm not here, that person is going to die. It's not my choice, and it's, yeah, for sure it's not natural, but it was something I had to do. Yeah, and then always I feel that there was this question of freedom as well, that is super, that you write about in many points as well, that the Western idea of freedom is this kind of very individualistic, almost like psychological, like this experience of freedom, that we're not talking about whose freedom we are talking about, or what do you need to be free. It's just like kind of this feeling. I feel unfree if I need to be doing, say, care work. Yeah. But the question was like, why do we fear interconnectedness? I'm not sure if do we fear it? I don't know. I think we just don't want to see it, or maybe we don't value it. I'm not sure about yeah. I'm not sure. I think it's a good question. Maybe you can answer it if you have something to say about it. Yeah, but just like at some point I was thinking about this figure of this white philosopher dude, and how he's writing his whatever he's writing, his poems and columns and essays and plays and whatever. And then also, because for me art is a lot about communication, and then I felt that there is something in the act of this philosopher writing his things and then putting them to the world. And it's the same act or the same gesture that a small child does when my child was like 2 and they were like, "Mom, look at me." And then I looked at them, and then I looked away and continued with my own business. And they were like, "No, Mom, look at me all of the time." And this idea that I feel that we actually become human by the gaze of others and by the touch of others, that the white philosopher dudes do as well, but they just do it with words. Yeah, but I don't know, do we fear interconnectedness, or what's the deal?
Thank you. I feel like we don't necessarily fear it, but we have a system that wants us to fear it. And we crave it. We crave connection, we crave the gaze and the touch of and the connectedness that we feel with other people. But we have a system that is very individualistic and promotes individualism. So I think that's the core problem.
I think there's something so interesting here about talking about the world that we want and then surviving in the world that we're actually living in. So for example, when my book came out, I was very fortunate, it became very popular in Denmark, but of course there were also some economists who got a little bit angry at it, which is quite understandable, because I'm quite critical of some of the things that they do and say. And then but I became extremely emotionally affected by this criticism from these economists. Like, it really got to me I was extremely, and still am very traumatized by it, and have had a very strong stress reaction to it. And I was talking to my psychoanalyst about this, and saying, that they don't think I'm intelligent, they do not respect me. And she was saying, but Emma, aren't you also in your book arguing for a different type of intelligence? Isn't that exactly what you're doing? And I was like, yes, but why do they have to be so mean? And I think that goes exactly to what you're speaking about, that I am trying to open up for a discussion that is more caring, understanding of different types of weighing of being in the world, but I'm still living in a world where, that is not the care I'm getting back.
And kind of craving
and I'm craving, of course, being seen as a full human being, but that is not how the world works. So I think we're constantly in this situation where oftentimes you will actually be punished for coming with care into the world, because you will be exploited for it. And I think this is something that I spent quite a lot of time of in my book, because I think especially for women and within feminism, individualism, I think, is also an extremely important value for women, because many of women's lives have been completely sucked up by serving other people. Children, men, parents, like completely swallowed, and they haven't had time to do their art or foster their friendships or have a full sexuality, all these things that women have been denied historically. And I think this puts us in a very difficult situation where we have to see care work both as a burden and a privilege, and both as some, and I think this is probably for me the main task of being a human being, is finding out where do I start and others begin, and where do I end and others begin, when do I have to prioritize myself, and when do I have to give up the priority of what I want for others. And I think that one of the reasons that I wrote Deficit was that I was having such difficulty individually solving this problem. I could just see it was making me happy when I took time off to, for example, care for a friend who was sick or help my parents with something. I could feel that it gave me a sense of contention, like happiness. But I could also feel that it created a worry in me where I was like, am I giving up myself now? Am I becoming one of these women who is forgetting myself? Like I just could not navigate in this space. And I thought, okay, this problem seems much bigger than the individual. And I think that this double lens, and I think this is something we have in the debate with the trad wives and the women who are very much against trad wives and all this, that it seems that no matter what a woman does, she gets punished, right? So if she only chooses a career, she's completely egotistical, hates her children, and if she chooses to only take care of her children, she hates the state, doesn't pay any taxes, doesn't contribute, and is also egotistical, interestingly enough. And I think that's the conversation I really wanted to open also, to both have this kind of macro view, which is at the economy. I think you're exactly right, Annie, that it creates a society where it is very difficult to have a free, flexible, loving choice between caring and uncaring. And that creates incredibly difficult conditions for living a fulfilling life. Because it feels like no matter what we're choosing, we're getting punished, and no matter what we're choosing, we're feeling shame for not doing the other thing. I think there's a lot of pain and sorrow in that, almost no matter what you do.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely the damned if you do, damned if you don't question here. But what I feel that like also feminist care studies have looked a lot into is this kind of complexity and ambivalence of care. And I think that's like super important to keep in mind all the time. Kind of what I was talking about also, like the violence in care and all that. And I feel like economics, as you write, doesn't deal with complexities very well. That things have to be black or white, but obviously when we're talking about care, it's much more complex.
And I think it's evident, like from everything you've said in this discussion so far, and also from your works, that interdependence takes like a lot of different forms and is done in many different relationships. But still, it's like maybe the most basic thought of interdependence still is maybe within the kind of family unit. And also, while reading all of the works, made me think about family, like how we perceive family today, what does it mean, who talks about family, and I actually think it's a bit sad that maybe it's just me, but I feel that the concept of family is defined very narrow still, and as the nuclear family, and then it's associated more like with maybe, for example, this trad wife phenomenon, or with like conservative or far right forces, or that, and it's not being seen as something with progressive potential, like through what it also can be, for each other if you start looking into like also the good things about interdependence. So do you think there is some progressive potential in the concept of family, or should we talk about something else than family if we want to be progressive and talk about interdependence?
I mean, I've written a column called Let's Cancel the Family. So maybe there was some truth to that, or that was something I wanted to say. And I do. And this is also something that's in the book, The Deficit, that for feminism, I feel the question of family is difficult, because family, like in a capitalist system, it provides the taxpayers and it provides the workforce, while at the same time it takes the responsibilities of the state, like responsibilities of care and social reproduction. And I feel this is like why many family abolitionist writers have kind of critiqued all types of families. But then at the same time, I do feel that there is value in different family structures, and also like family as a place of resistance as well, and a place where some kind of knowledge of marginal identities, of different political realities can be shared. So yeah, maybe I wouldn't cancel the family altogether, but we can alter it quite a lot. Yeah, but I think the friction is just because we kind of do the care work in those, and usually it's the women. Yeah.
I'm thinking that, adding to your speech, that there is potential in families, and especially seeing family something that is not the nuclear family. If we talk about on the society level, on a macro level, that we are so hardly pushing women to give birth, and that's insane to me. Looking at the politics, what we have today, looking at the society that we're building today, looking at the future that we're building today, if we're discussing it in what's happening in Finland today, the austerity policies are creating a narrow view for the future. And I don't blame anyone who feels discouraged to bring children into the world. And that's why the politics matter so much, and how we see care work, how we value what we do, and especially because we need to have families feel like they're supported, they have a future, the future is bright. And if you don't have the feeling, if you don't have the trust in the society, then the result is what it is.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I think you also said something very important, which is something that I'm thinking about a lot, which is that the concept of the family as something that is positive has been completely hijacked by a very patriarchal and conservative agenda, which means that the only people who are really fighting for the family as something that is valuable and should be protected in some sort of way as a space that we need to care for are often extremely conservative people who will have, like I said, a patriarchal, a sexist view of the mother's role, of the father's role, of how to rear children. And I think this is a little bit of a mistake also of the left. And maybe also of what type of feminism has been the most palatable to capital, because that has been the feminism of getting women into work. And I think, from, the 60s to the 90s, feminism and economics went kind of okay hand in hand, because we wanted the same thing. We wanted women to work. And of course, feminists wanted it because we wanted women to have their own money, to decide who to have sex with and get married to and all these things. And economists wanted a bigger GDP, a higher productivity, and a bigger demand base. And those two things kind of went hand in hand, and everyone was happy, right? Women were working all the time. But that, I think, I gotta say, as a feminist, I'm extremely happy that we in the welfare state, I'm from Denmark, you are here in Finland, we have some of the highest working amounts of women working in all over the world. And I think we cannot deny how extremely important that has been in our societies for sexual freedom, for divorce freedom. It has been extremely important. However, it did mean that sometimes feminism kind of forgot what was it that women also spent their time on. And I think one thing is family, but another thing is also actually local community. And I think it's very obvious from my book and from my speaking that I'm a very positive towards the welfare state. I think in 90% of the cases it is an extremely important thing, but it has also created a society where we kind of outsource care to the state. And the idea that, your neighbors, your local community, the people that you know close to you, your family should be a bigger part of your life has kind of moved to the background. And I think that has had some positive effects, liberating women's time to work, to pursue hobbies. But I think it has also denied us something, which is close social relationships that matter to us in our day-to-day lives. And I think I am very much a big fan of keeping these ambiguities in mind in all the systems that we use and all the systems that we criticize, to say that the welfare state has been a big liberator, but it has also replaced some local community that I think has some very, very severe consequences for people's feeling of loneliness, for example. I think when we're talking about the fertility crisis, as we call it, that people are having less children, I think one of the reasons is also that we have isolated the family a lot. When you have a child in our part of the world, you are all alone. Because people are working very late. Many people cannot get help from friends and family and cousins, etc. So we have this isolated figure, oftentimes, of women on maternity leave, which is a tremendously lonely place to be. And I'm no big fan of like biologism or historicism, but I have to say also a historically extremely unique position. This idea of placing a woman alone with a baby in an apartment. And it is something that creates a social situation that many mothers struggle with a lot, and much more than they let on. Because there is no sense that it is something that caring for a child is something that you need to learn from someone else and need to understand that it is a skill. It is assumed that you just like biologically know how to breastfeed. And I think everyone who has breastfed knows that breastfeeding is a skill. There are coaches who teach you how to do it, and rich people can pay for this coach. And if you don't have those resources, you are often left all alone, at least in Denmark. And I know here in Finland you have that little box you send and all that, and that's also very nice. And I'm a big fan of the box, 100%. But I think it does not cure every loneliness. And I think something that I'm thinking about a lot right now, and in my book, I think I'm arguing in some sort of ways also for lower working times. And I think for me, that is not only about childcare, that is also about fostering local community. Getting help from childcare with childcare from people who live close to you, having closer relationships with other adults. And being mirrored and seen by other adults in your life, an extremely important thing for an adult human being. And I think that is something that I've thought about a lot, speaking of canceling the family, is the very, very high pressure we put on the romantic relationship after the child is born. So the person who we have a child with, they should be our best friend, our closest ally, our roommate, the person we have sex with, the person we go to every party with, and the person we do every social activity with. No person can fill all those roles. It is impossible to be all those things at the same time in a perfect way. And I think in most welfare states, people can make it work okay with work and children. Like they can just balance it. But it is at the cost of relationship to other adults. And I think that is a very severe consequence of the care crisis. And I think that is why we see a lot of shame within the family, because we see these adults where they say, okay, I have everything. I have these 2 cute kids. I have a good job. I have this nice partner, but I don't feel good. And I think that is a very painful situation, and I think so I want to cancel the family as the only place that is supposed to give us sustenance, and put some pressure off of it. It cannot do everything for you. And I think that is something that I've been thinking a lot about, and I think a lot of the fear many people have in having children is of this family in the welfare state as a very closed unit. Yeah, there's a lot of pain in there, I think.
Yeah, thank you so much, +1s for everything you said. And also, I'm not sure how it's in Denmark, but at least in Finland, I feel also that there is almost like an identity status, whether you have kids or you don't have kids. And then those groups suddenly kind of separate from each other. And then there's these memes, there is this picture of my friends in their 30s, and then there's house, and there's a straight couple with kids, and then there's me in my 30s, and then there is this person with a beer and a cigarette.
That's me.
But I'm like, can we put them together? Like, because I'm both of them. And yeah, so one thing that really annoyed me when I had kids was that suddenly I'm like, there is this huge gap between like us and them. Yeah, and it's definitely an identity thing, and I feel it makes everyone more lonely. Then like afterwards I've talked with my friends about the time when for instance, with one friend, when I had a baby and she didn't. And I always felt that this is like embarrassing, and I'm one of those women, so I'm not going to talk about my baby. And I'm not going to invite her over because she's not interested. And she always felt that, okay, so I'm not part of that team anymore because I don't know what she knows. So she's not interested in having me over. So definitely I feel that in Finland, those two worlds are like super, super separate from each other. And yeah, definitely makes everyone lonelier. Then I had one question I wrote down about the community, because I don't remember if it was something I read or saw or whatever. But I was thinking about like, what's the community? What's the reason why we come together with people in the first place? Because now we have this romantic relationship, I feel like, at the core of it, or this some kind of biological family, or whatever is the reason. But the nuclear family is there at the core, and then it's like love or whatever. But then communities, I feel, that can bring people together for some shared interest, for some shared goal, and they don't need to even be people who necessarily like each other. I mean, I feel you can have communities over something that you share, like a shared interest, and you're fighting for something together. And I feel that can also give a person a lot of life. But just kind of thinking different reasons to become together, or to come together with other people than just like, yeah, family.
Okay, so I promised in the beginning that we would do philosophical questions, and we would do measurements of economics. And even though I would actually love to linger in this question, and maybe in the audience question part, somebody will bring us back to these themes that we're talking about now. But I also want to talk a bit about economic measurements, because that is also a really big theme, both in Anni's work, Hattaratalous, but then also in deficit, and how it actually influences all of the things we're talking about now, like how we then structure everything else in our lives, and what we value and what we don't. And you both, like Emma and Anni, in your work, you really criticize the influential role of these maybe the most common or best known, let's say that, the influential role of like the measurements like GDP and the political outcomes that they lead to. So what do you think that we should measure instead? Or should we stop measuring altogether? Would that be better for a better care society?
I am a fan of measuring, but
are an economist.
I am an economist, but definitely there's a demand for different measurements, different indicators, and we have a wave of different kind of thoughts of economic measurements and economic aspects, and we can call them either donut economics or well-being economics. And there are many, many ideas how we should measure the economy rather than GDP. And I want to go back to the GDP, mentioning that Simon Kuznets, who was the developer of GDP, was never mentioned or never meant to have GDP as a well-being indicator. And that's what we have today. That's how we measure society's performance, basically. And I see that when it comes to GDP, there definitely is a space for where we could just get rid of it altogether. Because if we have the basic measurements for social impact, social indicators and ecological boundaries, that's basically what donut economics is about, that we measure the ecological boundaries and the minimum demand for social, for etc., water, food, care, equality, etc. So if we measure those things, then we should have a society that is functioning and that takes care of our people, and it's embedded in an equal way. And that's how I see the society should be structured as. And then if we have sort of production that creates a nice social impact, creates something good in the world, then there might be growth. But I don't see that we need growth per se.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think sometimes the conversation gets framed in this way, where it's like, so now we are measuring, right? Now we're like, we have order and Excel sheets, and we have numbers, and there's order. And like this idea of numbers, I think they have a tremendous also cultural power. It gives us a sense that there's something scientific is being done, and some truth is being told, right? And then, you know, there is this framing that people like me and Annie, we are arguing for a very chaotic world, where we just make decisions in the blind, and we have no idea what's going to happen. And what I feel is that actually that's what's happening now. On the care, especially in the natural sphere, we have been consistently, for at least 50 years, been making long-term political decisions, billions and billions of euro decisions in these areas with actually no real grasp of what the long-term consequences will be for people, for nature, and for relationships. So I think they have been very skilled at framing this idea that we are kind of anti-science. But I think in a way, using the type of model that I criticize in my book, which is called the DSGE model, using that model to say that care is only an expense and not an investment, in my opinion, that is anti-scientific. That is a misreading of the world and a distortion of reality as it really is. The fact that I was sick and then I came into hospital and then I was healthy, that is factually something that has happened in the real world. And if your model cannot grasp that type of development in a human body, then you're not grasping reality. And I think what I argue for is that there has been this idea that sciences that work with numbers are apolitical and never lie. But as any economist will tell you, numbers lie all the time. It's basically the only thing they do. And I think what I argue for is that instead of, for example, having a finance ministry, we have a ministry for political evaluation. And within this ministry, there are people who are experts in biology, in sociology, in education, in health, in birth, in children, etc. And every time we have a political analysis or a political proposition, we get an analysis from like a 360 perspective, and we can have an economist saying, okay, this is going to cost X amount of billions of euros. That's of course not uninteresting for the decision. But if we have an educational scientist who says, yes, but we also know that these types of policies, if they are integrated now, in 10 years, people will be reading 20% better, even if it costs a couple of million euros now. That is very important information. And what I was finding out was that basically, in most European countries, including this one, politicians are looking at calculations on the economy where the less public care we have, the richer we seem to be. So when you buy a dress in H&M, that makes money, that creates value. But if you go to a psychiatrist who is paid by the state, you are destroying value. You're taking money out of the real economy and being an expense. And I think that is simply not only reflective of not reality, but also not reflecting of your experience of value, right? Of course, the dress in H&M has a certain sort of value to you. You buy it, you think it's beautiful, you wear it to a party. That is also very nice. But then you go to a psychiatrist, and that is also very valuable for you. And I think, as I was also talking a little bit about in the beginning, for me the big mistake was, and I think one of the reasons we're in this, in my opinion, very difficult geopolitical situation and political situation for the West right now, is that we have thought that you can make value a bureaucratic question. That you can ask a person, a scientist or an Excel sheet, what is valuable to human beings? But value is a fundamentally political question. It reflects what type of society you want, what type of view you have of human beings. And I see both the rage on the left and the rage on the right as anger towards this bureaucratization of politics. This idea that you cannot express your political desire because all the political parties are the same and basically work towards the same goals with very small variations, right? And I think this is something that I'm thinking about a lot right now in terms of organizing, and something that I really enjoy with working with care work is that it actually opens up some new political alliances. So for example, I'll speak to a woman who is a trad wife, for example, and she identifies as a conservative and as right-wing, and then she reads my book and she really likes it. And she says, this is exactly how I think. We are not prioritizing the family, we're not prioritizing what makes life worth living. And she says, I thought this was a right-wing opinion. And I say, I understand why you thought that. Because you've seen feminists all your life arguing for work only as liberation, right? And I think what's good about care is that it makes some new alliances possible. Because as soon as you start talking about family, children, your brother who has a disability, who's not getting what he needs, you're getting politics and value into real life. And I think what bureaucratic politics does is that it makes policy elitist. It makes it so we'll talk about the deficit, for example, and it has no relevance to people's real lives. No one understands what does this mean for me, for my kids' school, for my work. And I think that's really kind of a big task for us who work with new alternative economies, is to bring things into the everyday. And I think that was something that meant a lot to me, that I really prioritized writing Deficit Kuluera, which was that, you know, for every macro point, I needed a micro example. So when we talk about hospitals, I talk about myself being sick. When I talk about Adam Smith, I talk about Britney Spears. I always try to bring things close and say, what is this in the real world? And I think, so I'm a big fan of science. I'm a big fan of measurement, of understanding what is really going on. But we have to, in my opinion, realize that actually right now we're living in quite an unscientific political paradigm, where a lot of the decisions that are being made on faulty science that misleads us and does not represent reality, which means that that very, very political decisions can be made, be posed as apolitical, and then when the consequences come, worse mental health, worse health outcomes, unhappy families, loneliness, depression, etc., all politicians will be like, oh no, we don't understand, why are people so depressed? And it's like, because you systematically cut mental health for 20 years. And I think that, so, yeah, I think that's just it.
So, as a person who works with politics on a daily basis, I really agree that the dominance of this like established economics that it has in the political sphere and in this political discussions, it makes the whole discussion really, and the realm of politics, really technocratic today, and technocratic in a way that is very distancing for people, and that again leads to politics just being perceived as a form of management. Like that's the role. But I think that politics should be a path for change, or a path for, you know, possibilities. And to do that, I think we need more political discussion around what living a good life actually means to us and how we can achieve it. And I want to ask you if you agree with this, but I think already from Emma's last speech, maybe yes. But what do you think defines a good life? Like, what are the questions that we should be focusing on in the political discussion?
Yeah, definitely, I agree. And first of all, I want to say something about the measuring and the bureaucratic side of it, and from the point of view of art, because that's what I talk about. But I feel that at the moment in Finland, this kind of utility talk, we have adopted it super well in the art field, and I understand the need to be strategic sometimes. When you're talking to the coalition party, you need to talk about money. When you talk about persut, you need to talk about, I don't know, nationalism and that.
So that's the far right.
That's the far right. Yeah, so I do know that sometimes you need to do lobbying. But at the same time, I feel at the moment when we're talking about art, we are talking about like how useful it is. It gives you mental health. It connects you to your society. You will live longer. Art will care for you. And these are probably true things as well. Even though when we talk about care, like art cares for you, who is it this you it cares for? Like I, as an artist, I might do something that gives me health and that disgusts you. And then like, who is it caring for? But anyway, but in this kind of talk, always my question is, how do we defend art that makes you disgusted, that makes you angry, that makes you sad? That makes you feel violent. Like how do you defend those kinds of things? If you only say that we need art because it's useful and because of the huoltovarmuus, what's the word? Yeah. So for me, when we talk about art, and I'm coming to the good life part, I'm sure somehow. Yeah. Why I love art is that the logic behind why we do it is so completely, utterly different from the kind of economic logic or the capitalist logic. That for me, sometimes it's important to be able to say that actually art, while it might do all those things, also it might be completely fucking useless. Like what I do sometimes, I kind of want to scream, like it's for nothing. It's not useful. It's just me sitting in a fucking black cellar writing with my silly little pen, and then maybe somebody reads it, or maybe not. But the thing is that it gives me meaning, and I think that's like what defines a good life, is that it gives meaning, sense of meaning. I think Silvia Hosseini writes, not sure if she's quoting someone or not, but she writes that life doesn't necessarily have a purpose, like in the sense of what's the purpose of life, but it can still have meaning. And for me, art is something that gives me meaning. And also, what I said, that it's because the logic it's different. I'm not measuring it. I'm not doing it to become famous or to. Of course, I'm doing it to communicate to people, but then necessarily people don't understand, or they understand it differently, or it travels to, I don't know, someone reads my book in 50 years and thinks that it's other things that I meant, that there's so many things we can't foresee when making art, and it keeps changing. Yeah, so that's why for me it's so important. But anyway, so yes, like the sense of meaning, I feel that in the right, maybe there is this thought that people, if they wouldn't work for money, kind of if they wouldn't be working for the capitalist, if they wouldn't be making value for someone else, then they would not be doing anything. But I think if people would have more time, we would be doing things that we find meaningful. I think a person has to be quite depressed not to do anything. Like if you would have time, if you'd be healthy, I don't know, we'd be building bridges or playing with our friends' kids or taking grandmas to see films that we make, because why not? So I think like time that gives the possibility to do those idle things that still feel meaningful. Yeah, that, and love and people. But I don't know how to talk about this with the politicians. That I cannot answer.
Thank you, Olga. I think you summed it up pretty well. A few things I might add. I think there's, in well-being economics, we describe it as loving, being, and doing. Sort of those things are what sums up a good life. When it comes to the measurements, I think that everyone should have their basic needs met. That's given, but also have the time and energy to enjoy our family and friends, not to be burned out by work, have the meaning coming from something, and also having the time and energy and space to, and the life to enjoy nature. So basically, I think that's what we need.
I don't know what the meaning of life is. I'm working on it. That's why I'm in psychoanalysis. Yeah, I think I think I don't know.
That is also a good answer, because I think it proves that we should discuss it. Like what gives us meaning, or what is a good life, or what is good for us, and how we can like do those steps instead of just talking about some percentages or debt percentages or just tax percentages or so on, that are all important things, I think, as well. But just like what is politics for if it's just for saying the same things as the certain type of economists already said, and being like putting value back into it.
Can I supplement with one? I think something that I'm thinking about a lot, and I think the book always also ends with this in a way, is that one of my primary issues with economic methods is that it is always based on prediction based on previous knowledge. So it'll say, this is what we knew happened in 1937, and that's why we expect this to happen in the next round. And I think what I really appreciated what you said, Olga, about art is that for me, art is fundamentally non-productive. Like, you cannot make an art piece and say, my goal is to make people cry. For me, then you cease to make art. That when you enter and see some art, you never know what's going to happen. And I think that's what art fundamentally has as a relationship with care, is that care is also extremely unpredictable. Like, you can sit in a school class and have two different children and they get the same teacher, same book, same amount of hours. One learns to read in 3 weeks, one doesn't learn to read in 3 years. And there's nothing wrong with either of those children, they're just different. They receive the care in a different way. And I think what I find so harmful about the structures we're doing now is that they're all for the average person with an expected outcome. So we constantly enter rooms with an expected outcome. And what I appreciate so much about art, and I think why art also matters a lot in my book and figures a lot in my book, literature, for example, is that for me it is one of the few rooms, maybe except for something like sex or something, where we actually enter an unexpected room where we don't know really what's going to happen exactly. And it is very rare for us to even get to be in a room like that. We're constantly striving, like at the work, the line needs to go up, and then the child needs to learn to speak in X amount of weeks, and if they don't follow that curve, then there's something wrong with the child, and they'll get a diagnosis, and then we enter into a relationship, and then we need to get the apartment, and then when we're 32 and a half, we need to have the child, and I think what I'm trying to have happen in my own life, which is something that I'm finding extremely difficult and also extremely anxiety-inducing, because it is so difficult in the structure we have, is to enter spheres where I don't know what is going to happen. And I think economic logic is fundamentally very hostile to those types of rooms, because they find it undescribable and difficult and dangerous almost, right? And that's why they try to with art and say, for example, I saw at the Danish Film Festival, Copenhagen Docs, I saw a documentary about Nazism. And I think their donors wanted them to send out like an evaluation schema, so they could measure the impact of Copenhagen Docs. And I saw this documentary about Nazism. And the first question was, did this movie change your political views? And I was quite skeptical to Nazism already as I entered the movie theater, but it didn't help. I hate them even more now. And it seemed so absurd. I had seen this incredibly moving movie that had made me think about my Jewish friends, made me think about modern fascism, this long list of things that had mattered a lot to me for many weeks. And then I got this evaluation where from a scale of 1 to 10, are you less of a Nazi now than you were? And they were trying to make everything fit into their language, right? And I think that is something that is happening constantly. If you work in the public sector, you will know this very well, right? Trying to make everything fit to speak a language that your actions and your job fundamentally doesn't speak. It speaks a completely different language. Is this child a success or not? Have they reached the goal or not? And I think I'm trying to say, how can we open a space that plays for different rules, that has a different language? And as you said earlier, Olga, and you also touched upon it, Annie, the family is one of the few where we can try to kind of fight our way and make a little bit of a protected space with different rules, right? But it is so difficult, and I'm thinking of how can we have workplaces, public relationships, art rooms, where we don't know what's going to happen, and that doesn't make it dangerous. And in economics, they always think something is going to be worth less if we don't know what's going to happen. But we could say maybe if we don't know what's going to happen, it'll increase in value. Something better will happen than we thought would happen. And I think that I'm trying to make a bit of meaning out of that, of actually, and I think that's why I think it's so difficult to answer, because I'm actually trying to be in the safety of not knowing what's going to happen.
Yeah, I'm actually just repeating what you're saying, but I think because it's funny. For years I've been thinking that there's something similar in, and don't get me wrong, but something similar in kids play and making art and having sex. Like there's some unproductivity or like unpredictability in all of those, and how you say that they kind of have different rules or they have like different logic in it. Yeah. It's just funny that I've been thinking about the same.
Okay, now we have 14 minutes left of the discussion, and I have some questions, but I think it's time now to get the audience involved, and also you've been sitting and standing for an hour and 16 minutes, so maybe this is your time also to stretch a little bit and stretch maybe your hands, the ones who want to ask a question. I think we have the space for a couple, at least, if we start now. So please raise your hands, and we'll start from the first row, and think about it in the audience. If there's something you want to ask, you'll have the chance to. But start here.
Thank you, Emma, Olga, and Anni for such insightful comments, and also Mia for moderating it so well. It kept occurring to me that what we haven't talked about, which is the role of immigrant women and men in societies such as this, because they bring a culture of care from the global south that is, and when they come here, there's a contradiction about what is expected of them in a culture here and how they use social benefits. And Finland has the highest rate of unemployed immigrant women, and that's considered a problem because they're not gainfully employed. But what they're doing, in addition to having a background in law and medicine, where they can't convert that into the Finnish system, is they're also taking care of families where they don't have extended help that they had in India or Sri Lanka. So I wonder why we don't talk enough about the challenges of immigrant communities. This is true in Denmark, where they're so ostracized. But also, just to flip that, what can we learn from immigrant communities about changing the politics of care in the Nordics? Because I think there's some really deep insight. I just spent a few weeks in India, and I realized the kind of communities, interrelationships that are there that sometimes we struggle with here. But on the flip side, when I'm in India, they're like, oh, you're from the happiest country in the world. I'm like, well, it's complicated because it's happy for certain people and it's not exactly what you think. So I thought maybe an addendum to your book could be the value of care kind of translated through immigrant communities. What does that mean for us today?
Yeah, I'm so happy you're asking this, because I've actually been working a lot on this in Denmark, and the book has been very popular in India, so that's been really fun to experience. But I think something that I've noticed just like culturally and linguistically in Denmark, when a white woman takes care of her children, she's called like a trad wife or a full-time carer. But when a brown woman is working full-time taking care of her children, we're calling her an inactive immigrant woman. And I think it is very much how we have extreme difficulty navigating the idea of being forced to do something. So I think oftentimes in Danish culture, I think it's probably similar in Finland, when we encounter an immigrant woman who comes from the Middle East or from India or Pakistan, then they'll say, oh, she's forced by her husband to work alone. and to take care of her children. And then when we encounter a white woman, they'll say she has, the same right-wing parties will say she has had taken the brave stance of going up against feminism and not forcing herself to work, but being a proper woman and doing what women were supposed to do. And these are people doing identical things, right? And I think that something that I've found very interesting about organizing, which I've done quite a lot with immigrant women's communities in Denmark, is that they find they are some of the people who have, in my opinion, the clearest analyses of the deficiencies of our care system. And I think actually a lot of my work is that what I was saying about local community and family and how the welfare state kind of can destroy that sometimes is actually very inspired by things that I've been told by black and brown feminists in Denmark about how it was for them to realize. For example, I have a friend who is disgusted at how we treat elderly people in Denmark. Like, she will go on rants for hours about, this is your mother. She took care of you your entire life, and now as soon as she's like 75, you'll put her away in a home. As soon as she develops the smallest type of dementia, you don't even want to see her in your culture. You don't even want her in the street. You don't want her in your restaurants. And I think it is so interesting that, and something that I've been thinking about a lot, because I have a partner with a disability. He has cerebral palsy. And a lot of his friends who cannot walk, for example, or are in wheelchairs, they go on holiday to Italy. Because in Italy, in every restaurant, you can come in with a wheelchair, because it is a culture where you bring the entire family when you go out. And in Denmark, in Copenhagen, if you sit in a wheelchair, you can pee in 1% of Copenhagen restaurants. And I think it shows a completely different relationship to who is important and what matters, and who is excluded from nice society and who is included. And I think we have a lot to learn in our part of the world from societies that are more family-oriented and that are more local community-oriented. And I talk about it quite a lot in the book, that also, specifically in our part of the world, it is very important to note that the family becomes even more important for people who are victims of systemic racism, because it is a fortress against a very hostile society, right? So oftentimes people who come here will become more interested in Pakistani or Indian culture than they were when they left, because it becomes something that they can be proud of in a society where someone tells them you have nothing to be proud of. And I think oftentimes, and we have been bad at this in feminism in Scandinavia, I think we will often say you have to choose, are you a Danish woman or are you a Muslim woman? That is often sometimes, and I think it is such an extremely counterproductive way and if you're a Danish woman, you work. And I think it is such a counterproductive way, and I think a lot of my interest in care comes from engaging with immigrant populations and immigrant feminists in Denmark, and seeing how they view womanhood in a way that I actually found quite a lot more interesting than a lot of Western feminism.
Do you want to add something?
No, I think that there was a lot.
It up. Yeah.
Great. Okay, let's have another question from the audience. Yes, you can see you there. Yeah.
Super. Thank you again for the inspiring conversation. I'm being really moved here in the middle. I just wrote my economics bachelor thesis on pro-natalist policies, and I would love to hear your opinion on kind of government policies on trying to increase the birth rates. Is it useful? And maybe, is it a problem we have to solve?
I'm sorry, I have to ask a question. If the question was that if the birth rate or infertility is actually a problem, that was the question.
No, I was wondering, like, what do you think about our governments having these policies in place to increase fertility, and do you find the policies useful?
Well, first of all, like I mentioned before, I think the world that we create is the policy that we're doing. So basically, if we are creating trust in people, if we are creating safety nets, if we are creating a world where we want to bring children in, that we can trust our government to keep us safe, to keep us healthy, then that's the policy that we need to make. And what we see now with austerity policies is the counterproductiveness completely. And we see it in our economy, we see it in our society, that we are creating a place where there is no trust for the future. So basically what I'm saying is that we need more feminist politics, we need more feminist economics in place so that we can have a better place for our children as well.
Okay, then let's take one more over here. The audience,
yes. Thank you, Emma Olgani. You are doing Lord's work. If you don't believe in God, you're doing nature's work. I'm curious to know one aspect of care, which is the sort of the emotional setup and the emotional belief system of people, and especially how capitalism, Western neoliberal capitalism, has also made sure that it has shaped it in a certain way for every people to feel in a certain way, so that it follows a certain system. And how difficult is it for individuals that are now kind of atomized, to break that path? And is it true that if we, as a community, start sharing our emotional belief system and have more exchanges at an emotional level, that might be the case that we might be able to actually transform the system? Does a system transformation start from that?
That's a good and big question. I think one of the central points in deficit, I think in the political debate, we've been very good at saying there's economics over here and then there's culture here. And I would say that it's not like that at all. Economics affects culture and culture affects economics in like an infinite loop. So how we look at people in economics affects our culture, and how we act culturally affects economics. One of the perfect examples is pay in the public sector, in the women-dominated public sector, where they have low cultural status, so they have low pay, and then they have low pay, which gives low cultural status, and then it just goes. I also think that a central point in deficit is that it is extremely difficult as an individual to go up against this. There are systemic things in place that kind of makes it almost impossible for you as an individual. And I think my book is certainly not a coaching book where I tell you, this is how I broke the chains of uncaring and became a lovable individual. It is much more like a cry for help, where I try to understand why it's so difficult to me to become the person that I know would make me happy and that I know would be better for the people around me. That it is, of course, economically difficult for me to choose to care, because we have high housing prices, we have a certain standard of living that is expected, but also we have something that is more culturally valuable than other things. But I think that I have to say that I actually all around me see people who break with these ideals all the time. And I think my book is about saying maybe we already have ideals for the good life around us. I often, travel all around Europe, and will go to a small city, and I'll meet a nurse who's worked for 30 years as a nurse part-time and has 3 children, and she is much happier than many of the people in big inner cities who work 70 hours a week at a big law firm. And I think that my book is very much about instead saying, you know, how can we make men's lives look, or women's lives look more like men's? It is about how can we make men's lives look much more like women's have traditionally done. Because I actually think when we see people choosing to work with care, choosing to maybe work a little less in order to prioritize local community, we are seeing a role model for how a life could look in a more ecologically sustainable life, a more humanly sustainable life. And I think sometimes when we talk about, oh, what would it look like if we had degrowth, for example? What would it look like if we worked a little less, had a little bit less money? And I would say those people are all around us already. If you have an aunt who is working part-time and spends a lot of time with her children and maybe doesn't have a big materialist consumption, but has a pretty good life, you're looking at how life would be under degrowth. And she probably has, you know, lots of time for things that she really appreciates, but she maybe can't go shopping all the time. And maybe it's fine. So I think sometimes we think we have to kind of, in Denmark we say, invent the deep plate every time we need soup. That's, and say actually we have ideals for this type of life all around us. There are ways of living we can copy, we can be inspired by. It is not foreign that people are actually making choices in their life. And I think something that I ask myself all the time is that when I was in high school, why did I not consider becoming a nurse? What was the arrogance in not considering that? I love being with people, I love taking care of people, but I did not think it was good enough for me. And I think I'm confronting that arrogance within myself. And why I felt that it was below me with my good grades and my whatever the hell, right? And I think confronting that arrogance within yourself and what type of desire it was that I wanted to have fulfilled by not doing that and not choosing that, my own fear of having children, for example, my fear of losing my freedom, all these types of things we've been discussing today. This is not only something that I discuss on an intellectual level, it is 100% of a part of my real life. And I think that is the thing we can do within our own life, is that I often think of feminism, and I think feminism is not about me living my biggest dream, it is about no one living my worst nightmare. And I think, why do I fear lives that are all around me? And if I fear that life and I do not find it good enough for me, why do I find it good enough for other people? And I think I'm trying to confront in myself, why am I so scared of living a life that is centered around care? And why is it that I'm scared to become those people? Because when you actually meet them, they've figured out something that I certainly haven't figured out yet. And I think about that a lot. Who is actually the person we're putting on a pedestal as what life should look like in the future? And they are living in this city right now, how life could look like. And when you talk to them, they want some more colleagues and some more resources. But other than that, many of them have figured really something out.
Thank you so much, and we'll wrap it up with this this last comment from Emma. Thank you so much for this discussion. It has been amazing. I think 1.5 hours for me at least flew by. I hope you are still not fainting in the back. Now is a good time for you to get a breath of fresh air before the next program. Thank you so much for us.